Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us in a September morning. I'm Brian Hardin, the senator from District 48, the real West. We rub on Wyoming and Colorado. So once again, for many of you, you need to keep folding your paper map out 5 more times. That's where we are, way out there. And so I'm the chair of Health and Human Services Committee, and I introduced LR 191, which focuses on issues within the jurisdiction of the Health and Human Services Committee. Specifically, LR 191 examines the sustainability of applied behavioral analysts for Nebraska families. Over the past year, there have been several concerns brought to my attention. And so we're going to be discussing those today. Let me also say, we've got a few little procedures that we'll have you help us out with. This is for invited testifiers only today. And even if you are an invited testifier, we have a green sheet. Fill that out. Have you seen the green sheet? Katie, Barb, are those out there for people to find? So fill one of those out, print clearly, and kind of move to the front of the room and let us know that you're here. Hand that to one of these ladies when you come up. When you come up to testify, please speak clearly into the mic. This is the part everybody forgets. Spell your name and ensure that we get an accurate record. If you wish to register your attendance, there's a yellow sheet, and it's a non-testifier sheet available in the back of the room as well. Please note, as this interim hearing is for gathering information and not for specific legislation, there's no need to indicate a position for or against. Written comments submitted by 8 a.m. this morning were accepted and will be included in the interim study documents. We'll be using a 3-minute light system for all testifiers. Don't worry, you're probably going to be asked a lot of questions, so you'll be sitting in that chair a while when you come up, okay? When you begin your testimony, the light on the table will be green. When the yellow light comes on, you have 1 minute remaining. When the red light comes on, it means that lady over there is going to hit a big red button and it ejects you out the top of the building. No, but we will ask you to wrap up your thoughts. A few final items to facilitate today's hearing. If you have handouts or copies, please bring those up. A dozen of those is helpful, and give those to the clerk. Silence or turn off your cell phones. Verbal outbursts or applause, exuberance is not permitted here in Nebraska. So such behavior may cause you to meet one of our strapping state troopers. So I'm now going to have the committee members introduce themselves, starting with Senator Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bo Ballard, District 21 in Northwest Lincoln, Northern Lancaster County.
Dan Quick, District 35, Grand Island.
Glenn Meyer, District 17, Dakota, Thurston, Wayne, and the southern part of Dixon County in northeast Nebraska.
Good morning, John Frederickson, District 20 in central West Omaha.
Merv Reapy, Legislative District 12, which is Omaha, Millard, and the small town of Ralston.
Also assisting the committee today is our legal counsel, John Duggar, and our committee clerk, Barb Dorn. And our page for today is Katie. Katie's brand new to this. And so thanks for being with us. So today's report will address the sustainability of ABA services for Nebraska families.
Chair Hardin, you're recognized to open.
Thanks for having me today. Several concerns have been brought to my attention over the last year in regards to ABA services in Nebraska. First, Medicaid reimbursement rates for ABA services in Nebraska were found to be approximately 2.6 times higher than the national average. In addition, middlemen were taking a significant portion of those rates, in some cases, as much as $144.44 per hour were charged overall. Second, the state has been out of federal compliance due to these excessive rates, an issue that persisted until August 1st of this year. Finally, there's the troubling absence of background checks for the registered behavioral technicians, which raises serious questions about the safety of individuals receiving therapy. I firmly believe that our vulnerable populations, particularly autistic Nebraskans, deserve access to high-quality services delivered in a fiscally responsible manner. Based on my observations, neither of those priorities has been fully met. The testifiers who follow me will share additional details, and I'll be happy to answer any questions of any of you now to the best of my ability, as long as it only requires very short words. And I will also chair this interim hearing. Questions?
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none.
First testifier today, Mr. Ahern. Welcome.
Good to be here. All right. Good morning, Chairman Hardin and members of the Health and Human Services Committee. My name is Matthew Ahern, M-A-T-T-H-E-W-A-H-E-R-N, and I am the Deputy Director for the Division of Medicaid and Long-Term Care in the Department of Health and Human Services. I'm here to provide information for the committee related to the LB 191 on the topic of applied behavioral analysis. Medicaid's recent rate adjustment for ABA services has received considerable attention in recent weeks, and understandably so. ABA is a crucial set of services that help many of our Nebraskan beneficiaries with autism build useful life skills. It is for this reason that Medicaid has taken significant steps to ensure these services remain sustainable in the years to come. Between 2020 and 2024, Medicaid payments for ABA services in Nebraska increased from 4.6 million to 85.6 million, an increase of nearly 1,800%. This was due to a combination of factors, but primarily driven by a flood of providers entering the market to take advantage of relaxed telehealth requirements through the pandemic and Nebraska Medicaid's ABA rates, which are among the highest in the country. The department became extremely concerned about the quality of the services Nebraskan children were receiving. The Office of Inspector General at the United States Department of Health and Human Services recently launched a nationwide investigation into ABA services and issued reports indicating Indiana made at least $56 million in improper payments. Another recent OIG report released in July showed that Wisconsin made at least $18.5 million in improper ABA payments. There was a state OIG in Massachusetts that indicated $17.3 million in improper ABA payments. Some of the common findings showed inappropriate billing, insufficient documentation, and insufficient provider staff ratios. There is no reason to believe that Nebraska is unique in this situation and consequently shares similar risk of also paying back millions of dollars to the federal government. The drastic increase in ABA costs and quality concerns were unsustainable and put our members at risk. In response, the department took actions in two main tracks. First, in January, our program published revised ABA service definitions that clarified and enhanced medical necessity criteria, as well as worked to set guardrails to protect against misuse and exploitative practices. Second, in August, after a comparative rate study, we adjusted our payment rates to align with the average rates of our surrounding states. These steps serve to balance our two main priorities of ensuring beneficiaries get the care they need while protecting Nebraskan taxpayers' hard-earned dollars from irresponsible use and federal clawbacks. We recognize and appreciate the questions and concerns raised through these processes, particularly the comments around ongoing access to quality ABA services. Nebraska Medicaid is committed to ensuring quality services continue to be available to our beneficiaries. ABA services will continue to be covered for all Medicaid members, and Nebraska's rates will remain competitive with peer states. While we recognize the rate adjustments create the need for business changes for many service providers, Medicaid will continue to work with our provider community to ensure they are supported in caring for our beneficiaries. Thank you for your time. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Questions? Senator Reapy.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for being here. I'm hoping that you can help me out here because we've seen some, and it's in your statement about clawbacks. And Wisconsin has had some, I think Indiana has had some, Massachusetts. I can't help but think that you at least maybe mentally run some numbers. What is the possibility of a clawback for Nebraska, given our own tax situation budget situation that we're facing?
So as I mentioned, I think the risk is certainly there. We are doing our due diligence from a program integrity standpoint to do what we can to evaluate and audit accordingly, especially given the flags that have been raised for this. That's a primary focus for us. We're also working with our MCOs so that they will be doing their own sort of audit process in looking at this. That said, what our main effort has been is an effort to make sure that we shore up our process, right? That we get out ahead of this. We have not had any OIG investigations to date. So our intention is to address what we can, make sure that our situation doesn't look the same way as some of the other states have. So we're tightening up the guardrails. We're removing some of the incentive by putting our payments back in alignment and doing what we can to facilitate better utilization management, potentially up front, and tightening up our program integrity. So our effort has more been around let's shore things up to make sure our situation doesn't look like the same risk profile that they're seeing in other states. In preliminary reviews, it does seem that we are seeing some of the consistent issues, though I wouldn't want to comment on the degree to which that's happening because there's still ongoing reviews and investigations.
Given our budget situation within the state, can you project it? I'm going to make an assumption. You correct me if I'm wrong. We don't have the luxury of a long readjustment period of time. We can't do it over 10 years or anything like that.
I would agree.
So it's rather serious, if you will. Maybe that's an understatement. Okay, you've answered my question. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here.
Senator
Thank you,
Frederickson.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here and for providing testimony. And I will say I do appreciate the department being proactive and kind of looking at some national trends and sort of being thoughtful about how we might be able to get ahead of the ball, so to speak, here in Nebraska. So thank you for your work on that. My one initial question I had, and I know you sort of implied this as well, is like there's been some possible findings from the department. What oversight, if any, has the department had on ABA clinics that do accept Medicaid or MCO dollars? So whether that's through auditing or just to ensure that quality care and clinically indicated care is in fact being provided.
Yeah, so I would say the first step in terms of making sure that we have appropriate licensure or certification within the state to make sure that there's some vetting that's going on. I think that the steps that we've taken to make sure that we put out those service definitions and have more clear guardrails in terms of what we expect for clinical quality, what we expect for the level of oversight from the BCBAs for RBTs providing the services, indications of what we would expect in terms of engagement with parents or guardians with that care to make sure that we're driving out the best possible care. The benefit of having those service definitions is it also gives a formal structure for the MCOs to do more thoughtful utilization management, right? It's setting up guidelines in terms of what those thresholds should look like and how they may apply authorization to make sure that, you know, if it's going above a given threshold, right? We've set thresholds for hours and per week, that's not a no, but that's you're going to need to provide appropriate documentation, plans, and demonstrate progress towards that plan to have ongoing approval. So hopefully we're setting up those structures to provide that. We are going through regular audits and program integrity reviews. That's a general expectation. But again, now that we have a particular focus here, that's giving additional sort of focus. But I will also say, and I think this is important, and maybe goes to the last part of my statement, our intention here is not to crush or to inhibit people from receiving these services. Our intention here is to make sure that everyone getting the service has the best quality service and not to impede the access. So we are paying particular attention as well on access for ABA services. So over the next year or two, we'll be looking more closely on that than we would otherwise have when we're looking more generally at access. We're setting up specific focus on ABA services to make sure that we aren't seeing problems there. And I will also add that each ABA provider has the latitude to contract with the MCOs potentially for increased amounts where they can demonstrate appropriate quality and return on that investment, and where they may also be able to demonstrate that there is particular access concern, then that might be an incentive for the MCO to contract above those rates if possible. But generally that's going to be based on delivering increased quality. So
Sure.
we've been trying to make sure we're making that the focus, where it's the quality without impacting the access, but that's a concern for us. So we're looking at that closely as well.
Sure. You mentioned the licensure component and ensuring that there's, I guess for lack of a better word, like guardrails on providers themselves. I know here in this legislature, we passed in 2023 BCBA
Yep.
licensure infrastructure. Can you maybe educate me a bit on where we are with that and that implementation? And, I'm
Yes.
thinking, for example, I would imagine background checks are needed to be licensed and.
That has been implemented. So there are certain components where we will ping against different registries, based on them being an enrolled provider. So we'll continue to ping against that on a regular basis. My understanding is that the majority of what is needed for the licensure in the state ties directly to their certification for as a BCBA. There isn't much that goes beyond that. So a lot of it remains dependent on that licensing body at the provider association level.
Thank you.
Other questions? Senator Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here, Deputy Director.
Yeah.
Can you give me a little bit of history on the reimbursement rates for ABA services? I just looking at your chart, if I had expenses raising 100 to 200% year after year, that would raise some red flags for me, at least in our household or businesses. And then kind of dovetailing off that, why is it 2024 that we were having this conversation instead of, so just a little bit of history on how we got here.
No, absolutely. So I think part of the understanding here is that ABA rates were not necessarily increased to the level they were based on ABA specifically as a mode of care. They were grouped into a broader bucket around behavioral health and mental health rates. And over the years, the legislature has increased the rates for behavioral health with the intention, I believe, to address all the other sort of access concerns. So what was stated about ABA rates is exactly the same for all BH rates in the state. So we are about 2.6 times higher than the national average for them as well. So it kind of came up with all of that. What was different in this and what became the concerning part that kind of made it more salient is that we saw the rapid increase in utilization at the same time, which for the history is a confluence of a lot of issues, right? So we have the incentive with the high rates. We have some of the difficulty with the comparatively low guardrails set around the service. And it happened at the very same time as the pandemic that we relaxed a lot of telehealth expectations, right? So this would not have normally been available through telehealth. It became available through telehealth, which gave an inroad for a lot of providers, I would say potentially in Omaha for the rest of the state, but also all across the country, say, hey, those are rates we'd like to do. And if we can see a patient from New Jersey or we can see a patient from wherever, there's an inroad. So as a result, we had a huge influx of out-of-state providers and rapid increase in utilization across the state because of the relaxed telehealth. Now, granted, I think the majority of those have been able to establish a physical footprint in the state. So that has been the case. But at that time, the confluence of those events allowed for a rapid increase there. So the tricky thing in terms of how quickly that shows up for us is that it wasn't necessarily an identified service, it's in a larger bucket. But as we start to see, we have 1 year, and then 6 months later, we can start to see trends. And every time you look at that, you kick that out a little bit further. So that may mean that you're 3 years into this rapid increase before it actually is salient, because it's in the broader BH bucket. Now, it became abundantly clear to us that that was happening at about 2 years, 3 years in, and we're kind of deciding how far is this going to go. And it just continued to balloon. So as I said, initially in 2020, the rapid increase, we looked at it and it was about 6.6% of the total mental health budget or total mental health spend. By 2024, it's 42% of the total mental health spend. So, it's 6%. It's not going to be a huge thing if that jumps up to 10, or whatever, or 12. That's not going to show up as readily. But after 2 to 3 years, and now onto the 4th year, it became abundantly clear, and we needed to act quickly. And that's exactly when we started to see the OIG findings. And when we looked at the situation, for example, in Indiana, they were exactly the same. They had rates that were above the average. They had lower sort of guardrails in place. They had a big influx in out-of-state providers, and it became pretty clear that, okay, this is a case that applies to us, and we need to act quickly.
Okay, and kind of, if I may, Mr. Chairman, so are we, as a state, are we growing the spending pie, or is the mental health spend, are we slicing other providers out of that spending pie?
So it's not a fixed pie. The pie is just growing, but proportionally, ABA has become a much, much bigger proportion of that pie. So it's not like it's been contained as a result of them taking up a bigger part of the pie. It's just all grown. And we've had to adjust our rates, request additional sort of funding to start to address it as it became salient. We had to midstream adjust our capitations to our MCOs because the payment for ABA services got completely out of alignment.
Okay, and then one more question. If I heard a lot of concerns about access to care if we adjust rates. Do you see any problem? Do you see any concern with access to care if we adjust these rates? And have other states seen not quality access to care?
So what I would say is that I am always concerned about access to care, right? That is first and foremost for me, tied with quality of care. So I'll say that. So it's something we're paying attention to. As I mentioned, I have asked for targeted and specific reports so that we can look at ABA access to make sure that we're not seeing a swing where there's going to be loss. Now, I would also say this is a significant cut in rates or reduction or adjustment in rates, right? And I am not ignorant to the fact that businesses have to make business decisions, and there may have to be an adjustment because businesses are set up on the structure that's in front of them. And if that changes, things change and you have to make decisions and changes in businesses. And so that's I would assume that's going to happen. But we're paying attention to it as closely as we can. In our rate studies, when we looked at comparable states that had reductions, they have not seen reductions in the amount of services being provided. When we have comparable states that have rates at or below ours, they are not necessarily having access that's below ours either. In some of the data that we've looked at, the access does not necessarily positively correlate to increased access when rates go above the national average. There's a positive correlation as it gets up to the national average, but when it goes over that, we haven't seen a positive correlation in increased access to a substantial degree. So it's something we're concerned about. It's something we considered when we set the rates, and it's something we're paying attention to.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Meyer.
Thank you, Chairman Hardin. Where to start? Do you have to be a Nebraska resident in order to receive these benefits?
Oh, to receive these benefits? Yes.
I assume you're a Nebraska resident.
I am. Like, that's the easiest question I've faced today. I'm ready to do it.
You look Nebraskan, so I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
And so with the COVID pandemic, we had a lot of out-of-state providers taking, my words, not yours, advantage of our reimbursement rates, and they were treating Nebraska residents.
Mhm.
Is that continuing?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm aware we probably have a lack of providers in the state of Nebraska, so we have to utilize out-of-state.
So I would say the majority of the care being delivered now, they are here in Nebraska. We have also restricted telehealth access to some extent. I would say even then, to make it clear, they had to be licensed in Nebraska, whether they were personally in Nebraska or not. And we do have an expectation that the RBT is in person with the patient at all times. It would be the supervision of the BCBA. Where there's kind of the question about where they have to be. So I would say the majority of cases, they are in the state now.
Okay, thank you. If I may, Chairman Hardin. Do you know what percentage of our total overall spend of 85.6 million in 2004 or 24? What percentage was actually the delivery of services as opposed to cost going towards management? You know, what's the trickle down? What was our spend, if you have any idea of what our actual spend on delivery of actual services to the individual? Is there a way to break that down?
For ABA services in particular?
Yes.
All of that was, so all payments or almost all payments for Medicaid are inclusive of an administrative component. So we pay for a service rendered that is intended to include any associated sort of documentation or supervision and care delivery. So it would be difficult to parse that out because it kind of depends on the independent sort of cost structures of a given provider. But the assumption is that payment is payment in full and inclusive of any supportive administrative function.
So it's hard to break out the administrative costs as opposed to the actual delivery of services.
Correct. It's baked in. And I think it would be fair to consider those things to be the same thing, right? Because if you're not able to do the requisite administrative supportive functions, you can't deliver the service. Those are part and parcel. I would assume. I would view it that way.
Thank you.
Senator Quick?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. My question would be on the comparability study that was done.
Yeah.
I know not every state does things the same way. So
Correct.
maybe services in another state are parceled out and they're charged different rates for different things that they do. And in Nebraska, it seems like it's all under the one rate. So when you did the study, was it based on maybe all the services that those other states do, or just on one?
So we did an analysis of the ways in which they paid. In the end, the decision was made that we went towards the average for each of the rates that are associated. So there are certain billing codes that are associated with each service, and we did an evaluation at each code and service level to make sure that we were in alignment. There may be some nuances in terms of how they might be billing that is a little bit different state to state. So our intention was to address that on the average. So the expectation, there may be some variance, but if we're kind of finding our way in the average, then we're well in that average range. And as a result, we are we picked similar states that are our neighboring states because we tend to feel like their makeup is somewhat similar in terms of division of urban and rural and different things like that. But even after our adjustments, we are above the average in the majority of these codes for the nationwide we are. But our comparison was to our
observed personally. And I know what applied behavior analysis is. The RBT and the BCBA, what do those stand for my benefit?
Yeah, and so RBT would be registered behavioral technician or therapist.
Okay.
Technician. All right, thanks guys. Shout out to the crowd.
Do you know for sure?
Yeah,
Okay.
they helped me out. It was really good. And then board certified behavioral analysts.
Okay. Thank you.
Senator Frederickson?
Thanks, Hardin. Additional question. So you'd mentioned, obviously with the pandemic that sort of seemed to correlate when Senator Ballard had asked about the history and utilization around that. Do you know what percentage of ABA services in Nebraska are done via telehealth currently?
I do not know that. And one of the difficulties in tracking that, especially earlier on, is that we removed some of the requirement to indicate that in modifiers on the billing. So I'd have to double check and see what amount of that is happening remotely now.
Okay.
I don't know that off the top of my head.
Okay. And this may be a question for a provider, but my thinking is I would imagine with a treatment like ABA, having someone with the child is incredibly important. And so the telehealth component is something I certainly have questions about. So that'd be interesting to kind of look into how much is provided. But you mentioned they're required to have an RBT in person. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is our requirement right now. That I think would be the best practice. I don't know if that was always the case during the pandemic. My guess is probably not.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm not a clinician, so I don't want to necessarily represent that I know the best practice, but
okay.
But yeah.
So it sounds like if there were telehealth components, the RBT would be with the patient providing the service, and the telehealth might be through like supervision by a BCBA, for example.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
As I understand it.
Thank you.
My turn.
All right.
Okay. I'll ask this over and over again. Has the frequency of autism gone up in America since, I don't know, the mid 1980s?
Yes.
How much?
I don't know.
A lot?
Mhm.
I think the answer's a lot. Just,
Yeah.
I'll continue
I'm not an
asking that
economist,
question.
though one will be coming later, but yeah. I'm not also an epidemiologist, to be totally clear. But yes, a lot.
Do we know what the typical RBT in Nebraska makes per hour?
I think that pay ranges I've seen were somewhere between like $15 and $23 an hour.
Okay. All right.
But that's going to vary by provider and RBT by RBT, I would
Okay.
imagine.
Are there people who are taking an override on an hourly rate regardless of what the RBT makes? Are there organizations that take something out of the middle? So shall we say?
I would assume so. Anytime you employ someone, you're going to have additional overhead to cover.
Okay, gotcha. The sense that I'm getting from the big picture of looking at this for the last several months myself is that in 2020, we had a pandemic going on. I think I've heard someone utter the phrase, never let a crisis go to waste. Did that happen here? Were there outside organizations outside Nebraska in particular who came in and helped exploit this situation in Nebraska?
Well, I would say that there were people that looked at the circumstances and made decisions. Now, in terms of what their motives are, I can't speak to that, but it was a perfect sort of storm to take advantage of the situation in front of them. Not necessarily meaning that in a negative sense in terms of me assessing their intentions, but yeah, a lot of people looked at the situation and made decisions that took advantage of that. Yes.
It sounds like there were several legislatures, including one that I was a part of in 2023. In fact, 4 of us sitting here voted for something that included a 17% increase in 1 year that affected this. So shall we say some of the adults in the room weren't paying attention to it, and through the, let's call it Nebraska nice process, not only on the part of legislators, but on the part of the regulatory world, we didn't exactly mind the farm. I'm asking your opinion. Is that part of what made these conditions possible? Is that the legislature and the governor's offices, plural, not keeping their eye on the ball? Because I think we were probably the most expensive even before COVID came along across the country in these rates.
The rate increases certainly contributed to the situation.
Okay. So a 2,000% increase is evidently enough to capture the federal government's attention. Is this across the entire United States, not just Indiana, Wisconsin, Massachusetts, Nebraska. Has this been a challenge? Granted, we win the prize on the rates and so on and so forth up until August 1st of this year. But is this actually a national problem?
It is a significant concern nationally in terms of looking at rates, looking at service definitions and in clinical best practice. It is.
In the world of Medicaid, is there anything that stands out bigger than this? Are we going to be having another one of these hearings on another topic real soon? Or does this seem to be the pinnacle of how something has been abused in America?
This is the most rapid increase of any specific specialty or service that I've seen in my time in healthcare.
Okay. So now that we have made some changes, as of August 1st, we changed some rates. You were saying that we've also addressed background checks with RBTs. Is that correct?
I'd have to double check where that is right now. Like I said, I know that we check when people enroll with Medicaid, we check against certain disallowance databases and databases for certain criminal issues. I'd have to see exactly where we are in background checks for RBTs in particular.
My understanding is that Nebraska will pay up to 30 hours per week for these services. Is that correct?
That is the maximum expectation on the initial service definitions. If demonstrated to be clinically appropriate, it can be approved beyond that.
And beyond that. How do we compare to other states across the country as far as you know? Do we offer more hours per week? Less hours per week? How does that look?
That's going to be a range. There are still states that don't have much by way of guardrails up. And that's been a difficulty. There are some states that are more restrictive. And I don't know of any that are more permissive when they have guardrails up. But I think we're putting ourselves in about the average there for now. But there's huge variability state to state.
I think our main concern, if I'm getting this right, is sustainability. To be able to continue to provide meaningful service moving forward. Have we done that so far with what we've done in the last month or so?
I think we've made huge strides in that direction. I think there's potentially more to do as we continue to evaluate the impact of the changes we've made.
Can you give us a sense what that might be, if there's more?
So we are continuing to look at this thoughtfully. We're continuing to engage experts across the country about these services and trying to do the best we can with evidence-based interventions. I would say there is room to look at the service definitions and identify if there may be different thresholds that make sense. There is room to explore the level of supervision. It's stuff that we want to consider thoughtfully rather than kind of a knee-jerk thing. But I would anticipate that there's more to come, but we don't want to do it in a knee-jerk way. We want to do it in a thoughtful way and evaluate the impacts of the changes we've made before we do so.
Did the modifications that came for August 1st, will they end up in a lapse of care for families in Nebraska?
I hope not. Our study would indicate it's not likely to, but again, we're going to pay very close attention to that because that's not what we want. We want to make sure that anyone that needs the care has access to high quality care that they need.
After changing what we have changed, how do we compare to other states now that we've made those changes?
So the changes in terms of the rates, those change on a year-to-year basis. We just finished legislative sessions for a lot of states, so we have to see what that looks like right now. My understanding is to when we made the change, it put us firmly in the average of our surrounding states and a little bit above average for most of the codes across the country. But that may have shifted since the last legislative session. That was based on our study. That's where we aim to be.
I'm just curious, did we get a nastygram from CMS or some other three-letter organization at the federal level in regards to all of this?
No.
Okay. Kind of explain and use small words if we were out of compliance with federal law, how are we out of compliance? I mean, does the federal dictate, essentially hand down, thou shalt have this percentage or this number, or how does that work?
Yep. So if I understand correctly, the compliance around that expectation is around us paying in a way that's fiscally responsible and not out of too far out of alignment. My understanding is that that CMS has not historically had flags to indicate when somebody was significantly paying above out of the norm, but have had flags when people are paying significantly lower out of the norm. What it comes down to is that there is a federal expectation in the regulation that we set our rates appropriately and in I guess thoughtful use of the funding that we have. The intention is not that Medicaid would be kind of setting something well below or well above. We should have an expectation that we're setting those rates in a way that balances kind of the expectations around being fiscally responsible, providing sufficient access and sufficient quality. So that's the guideline. So it's not necessarily as strict or as clearly defined as if you go over X percent, then like we're going to come down on you. But it's more an expectation in the regulations with some fuzzy lines around either side is what I would say.
What are other states doing to control these costs that you're aware of? Is it simply, are they doing across the board, we're going to cut Medicaid in general? Are they going after specific codes? My understanding is that these are codes that essentially match the ICD world. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the ICD is a diagnosis code world. So we're talking primarily around like CPT codes, which would be procedural codes, right, to indicate what the procedure is. And it's tied to an ICD diagnosis code, right? But we are seeing rate reductions or rate adjustments through states across the country. I know North Carolina recently announced rate reductions for ABA services. Indiana, prior to us, had made rate reduction changes. I know that some states are implementing hard caps on the number of services that can be received over a period of time. So maybe they can't receive APA services that have exhausted it over like 3 years or something like that. So there are a lot of steps being taken by different states. We have indications from other states that they will be lowering their rates as well. I don't want to preempt any of them, but yeah. So it's kind of an all hands on deck issue for most states that are looking at how they might be able to address it because they're facing similar concerns.
What are the requirements to be an RBT?
I can't speak to the specifics. I believe they have to have like a high school diploma. There's a certain number of amount of training. I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 40 hours of training and pass some sort of certification. But I couldn't speak to the specifics. I'm sure there's nuance there that I'm missing.
Here's a ticklish one.
Ready to giggle.
I bring this one up just because I'm a parent who raised a child on the autism spectrum. Are there any providers out there that you were aware of who have taken on the easier cases while passing on the more difficult ones?
I have heard of that as kind of part of the analysis that we're doing that's kind of ongoing. I've definitely heard of that. Yes.
Have you heard anything about, I mean, let's be very candid. None of us likes to have our money cut, our income changed. I don't, at least. Maybe I'm unique that way. But have there been any responses from providers about how they're dealing with this new information, either one way or another?
Yes, I would say both ways, right? We've definitely heard people concerned and indicating they may have to stop doing business in Nebraska or evaluate whether they can or limit. We've also heard from a number of providers that have indicated, I am surprised it took you so long to cut our rates. That wasn't tenable. And congratulated us and appreciated our changes. Though I will say that has maybe been the minority of the comments we've gotten. But, you know, it's a spectrum. So we've definitely heard both. You know, what it will be interesting to see is that our rates are not out of alignment with the rates that are being received and people are running businesses on. These same providers are running businesses on in other states. So it may be an adjustment, but we know for a fact that they can run business on these rates. So we'll have to see how that shakes out.
Other questions? Senator Quick.
And so like in the process of looking at all this, does the department ever do like site visits? I mean, did you go and talk to providers and see what type of services and see how they're working with the kids they have, their clients that they have?
Mm-hmm.
And was that part of the process as well?
Yep. So I think that we are looking at how we might be able to do more of that. What I will say is that as they become enrolled with Medicaid, our team, any behavioral health provider, and this falls under that category here, we do go out to their site. We have checklists to kind of evaluate what's going on there. So that is done. That is at enrollment, so it's not necessarily something that is done in this context over time, but at initial enrollment, it's gone. They go out and do that assessment. It's not announced, though they know that we're going to come at some point, and we go through certain criteria to evaluate that space in the context in which they're working. Though the facilities and the sites themselves aren't subject to the licensure. The provider is licensed, and as a result of them being enrolled, we do some assessment of their space where they're providing care, but that's not subject to a license in the same way that many facilities might be.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? I would just add my understanding to an earlier question you asked, Senator Meyer. The most that can be charged for an RBT is $144.44 an hour. That's what was there up until August 1st. My understanding is approximately 25% of the hours that were billed to Nebraska were at that highest rate. So,
And my concern has been, are we actually putting the dollars in the delivery of services as opposed to the management side of it? You know, how efficient are we? And I recognize that MCOs by contract are limited on profitability. And one of the questions I had, I did not ask, and I don't want to make this hearing all about Mr. Ahern, but are the contractors held to the same standard as the MCOs with a specific percentage allowable for profit margins?
So what I would say,
answer that.
I can give you a little insight into that in terms of how that's structured in Medicaid. There are, when we are paying based on a set sort of fee schedule that is indiscriminate to the provider providing it, we are setting that amount, we pay that amount, and then if they can drive better profitability off of their cost management, then they can. If it costs more, then they may conceivably take a loss on that administrative, but it's up to the individual provider as they're doing that. That said, there are mechanisms in which we pay tailored rates that aren't necessarily as blanket. And in those contexts where we are setting sort of a reconciliation, then cost and administration is absolutely factored in what we pay them. So generally speaking, in a lot of those situations, like federally qualified health centers or things like that, they cannot make a profit by statute or by federal regulation. So we're paying them to make them whole to their cost. So there are certain things that we pay that way, but those are in the minority. The majority of what we pay is a set fee schedule, and we pay that out to providers irrespective of their their profitability. The difficulty in that would be how we would be able to scale that. So we may have providers that send us a volume at a level where it would make sense for us to expend the resources to collect financial information to understand that. But that would be in the drastic minority. The majority may send us 3 claims a year. We still want them to be able to see our patients, or they might have like 5% of their payer mix is set up for Medicaid. If we were to add that administrative burden on them, then it would be out of alignment with all of how the rest of insurance pays. And it would be an additional work for them, which would probably make it a disincentive for them to participate with us.
The reason I asked the question is just overhead can eat up an awful lot of our taxpayer dollars.
Yep.
And so, are we paying a greater proportion or unfair proportion to administrative costs as opposed to providing services? I don't think anyone on this panel, and no one on the floor of the legislature, and certainly no one in the state wants to reduce delivery of services to those residents in Nebraska that need it. I certainly do not. But the most efficient delivery of every taxpayer dollar is what we're focused on here, if I can take that. So that was the direction of my question.
No, I think that's a fair question. I would add one other sort of context is that in the vast majority of cases, we pay well below the commercial average and even below the Medicare rate. So it is less likely that people are getting rich off Medicaid dollars and more likely they're taking a hit to see our patients. So I would say in the vast majority of cases that isn't necessarily a concern. There are a few sort of outlier services in which we pay well above the commercial average, behavioral health and ABA being one of them, where that might be a question, but there's almost nothing that we pay for in which we're paying the going rate.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Other questions? Thank you for being here.
All right. Thank you very much. It's been fun, guys.
That is a strange definition of fun. Dr. Amy Nordness from MMI. Could I get some? Thank you, Julie. If you could close that door, that'd be great. We just have too much joy and exuberance going on in Nebraska this morning. So out in the hallway. Thanks for being here. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today regarding the sustainability of ABA services for Nebraska families and clients. My name is Dr. Amy Nordness, AMYNORDNESS. I'm the Associate Dean and Director of the Monroe-Meyer Institute, also known as MMI. I have overseen all clinical services at MMI, which includes our Integrated Center for Autism Spectrum Disorders for the past 6 years. MMI employs over 120 ABA providers, which includes about 40 BCBAs. As I speak to you today, I'm only speaking about the impact on MMI, and I'm not able to generalize to other providers in the state. MMI is one of the biggest and oldest developmental disability centers in the world. We're a nonprofit organization and an academic unit of UNMC. We have a 105-year history of caring for vulnerable populations. We're a clinical training institution that provides approximately 120 clinical visits a year, with approximately 60% of those to our families with children with autism spectrum disorders. We also are continuously training the next generation of clinical providers, and we're also doing research to identify new discoveries and determine evidence-based practice in our field. ABA is a therapeutic approach grounded in the scientific principles of learning and behavior. It focuses on reinforcing socially significant behaviors to help individuals with autism learn new developmental skills and prepare them for participation in natural environments, including traditional classroom settings with their peers. ABA is evidence-based practice with decades of research validating the effectiveness for individuals with autism. Providers use ongoing direct observation and data collection to identify behavior patterns, and then treatment plans are individualized to meet each person's unique needs and arrange the environment conditions that influence that behavior. Research has shown that ABA can be highly effective with early intensive intervention, leading to the best long-term outcomes. Overall service costs have increased in part due to the increased prevalence of individuals diagnosed with autism, better awareness of the disorder, and changes in diagnostic criteria over time. Recent rate modifications implemented will impact clients and families compared to the level of services they received prior to August 1st. These rate modifications will also be a challenge that impacts our services at MMI. To remain viable, we may need to address rate adjustments in several different ways, including adjusting payer mix, reducing salaries, and increasing our caseload size. While rate adjustments might be needed, reimbursement must still cover the cost of providing appropriate services to sustain high-quality care. We will continue to provide ABA services. It might just look different than it did prior to August 1st. We need to ensure that reimbursement rates are managed at a level appropriate for the services provided in order to deliver the best quality care. Per regulations, payment for Medicaid services must be consistent with efficiency, economy, and quality of care. To address efficiency, guidelines should be implemented regarding the number of ABA service hours recommended based on severity, age, and unique needs.
You're in red, but please keep going.
All right. Economy really reflects not just the reimbursement rates, but also gradually transitioning patients to more naturalistic, less intensive settings as appropriate. And to address quality, we want to make sure that agencies are providing adequate supervision to make sure that we are providing the highest quality of care to our patients. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Questions? Senator Fredericks.
Thank you, Hardin. Thank you for being here and for your testimony. A couple of questions. You kind of briefly alluded to this a little bit, and I know Senator Hardin asked about this earlier. We have seen autism diagnoses increase quite drastically in recent years. And from a clinical perspective, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that, or if you could maybe shed some light on what we might be seeing or what might be behind that trend.
We do believe there is increased prevalence. It's now down to 1 in 36 children in autism diagnosed with, or children diagnosed with autism. Also, we're better aware of what to look for. And so families are recognizing those signs earlier and having their kids come in for evaluation. We also are seeing a higher number of older individuals come for evaluation too. Maybe it wasn't as detectable at a young age, but now that they're older and they're kind of seeing like, oh, that kind of sounds like me a little bit, we're seeing a lot more older individuals come in for evaluation as well.
Okay. You mentioned that MMI might need to sort of make some adjustments based on the rate changes. One thing that you described was adjusting payer mix. Can you sort of elaborate more on that? And specifically, my question is, how might that impact Nebraskans who are on Medicaid?
Adjusting payer mix, making sure that, that we are taking a certain number of patients from all different types of insurance plans so that we can cover our costs. We're not really trying to make money as a unit at UNMC. We need to cover our costs though. So for example, some of our clinics, we have a clinic on 50th and Ames in Omaha that's 90% Medicaid clients. It wouldn't be sustainable if we're taking a hit on 90% of our services. So looking at different percentages that we can take from different insurance companies. So could see a decrease in what would be allowed, but again, we are not going to restrict access to patients who have Medicaid from Nebraska.
Right. But what I'm hearing is there might be reduced availability to provide services to folks on Medicaid.
There could be. It's one of the things we're looking, this is all very new. We're looking at our financial models. What can we sustain? Can we spread it out a little bit more rather than it being so isolated in one area? That's our highest percentage. We have other clinics that are 50% Medicaid, other that are 70. So we're kind of looking at all of our different sites.
Okay. You also said the actual service itself might look different.
Mm-hmm.
Help me understand that more, and particularly from a clinical perspective.
Mm-hmm.
If in theory what's being provided is clinically indicated, how would that be adjusted?
We would not be adjusting direct service from an RBT standpoint, but what we could possibly look at is caseload size from a supervision standpoint. So our BCBAs supervise our RBTs. If they have a set caseload of how many different patients they supervise, we might have to increase the number of their caseload size so that they're supervising more RBTs, more patients overall, but we wouldn't be increasing that caseload size from a direct intervention RBT standpoint.
Is there any concern with increasing caseload size and quality of clinical care?
It's always a concern, but we have to find the right balance. You know, is one caseload size too little, another one too high? We really want to make sure that it's appropriate so we can still provide the best quality services. That's not something we'll skimp on.
Thank you.
Other questions? Senator Meyer?
Thank you, Chairman Hardin. Thank you for being here today. I appreciate that very much. You said older individuals are being diagnosed now, coming in and saying, hey, this sounds like me. Identifying, in your 6 years you've been involved with MMI, have the procedures for identifying folks with that are challenged with autism, the diagnosis, has that process changed, which has increased the number of autistic individuals that are diagnosed every year? Has that process changed at all, which has led to the increase?
The process hasn't really changed. We still use the gold standard assessment in order to diagnose individuals with autism. We have been working with a new tool called Early Point, which is just from a young age. We have an evidence-based way to monitor eye tracking to help with that autism diagnosis, which we can then get done in half the amount of time as the traditional paper pencil model. So that would allow us to have higher throughput. But again, that's only validated up to a certain age. So we wouldn't be using that with our older individuals. We have constantly had a wait list for evaluation. And so it is one of the things that I have over my 6 years, I haven't seen that reduced. We have just as high of a wait list for people wanting to have an autism evaluation than we did when I started.
Thank you. Just briefly, Chairman, how have treatments changed in the time you've been with MMI? Have you seen I would hope, a change in treatment, or how could you explain?
Yeah.
Please.
The core of our treatment has not changed, but some of the things that we have been doing at MMI, we've been trying to get a little bit more close to a family's community when they're younger age, rather than trying to haul them all into our main location in MMI. So we have some satellite sites where we try to do shorter bursts early on. We've also been exploring more group intervention. So as that child is ready to transition into learning practicing those skills, reinforcing those behaviors in a group setting, we try to move to a group sooner so we can eventually get them back into school and learn with their peers.
Thank you.
Senator Rigby?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm interested in the issue of dumping, and that is that, without naming names, do you have other agencies who maybe will refer to you the Medicaid, so you get this 90%, or is that geography? Do you have some of them that's to keep their payer mix in better balance, that they will refer to you, and they don't refer to you their higher, what would be a higher, even though they might be under Medicaid, might be a higher paying procedure, if you will.
Yeah.
You get some of that as a not-for-profit?
I don't have any evidence of that directly. We do, some of it's geographical, that leads to that higher, that rate. We do tend to get a little bit higher cases, and MMI provides ABA services, high quality, but we also do a lot more than ABA. So we can take on pretty challenging cases. So we do tend, because our reputation is well known for serving really complex needs, that's kind of who we see gravitate to us.
So your acuity rate might be higher than others.
That's what we suspect.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you.
Senator Quick?
Thank you, Chairman. And my question is on, we talked a little bit about diagnosis and things like that. Do you think over the years, I can remember our son had a learning disability in school, and they said he was ADHD, so they put him on Ritalin, but I know he's not autistic, but do you think some of those diagnoses earlier or in previous years could have missed some kids who had autism, and that's why we're seeing maybe an increase as well?
I think it's more about kind of mild forms, subtle forms versus missing it or getting it wrong. I think that as long as you do a thorough evaluation, you should really look through all the nuance of that. And so if someone truly has ADHD, and it will not show up as autism. And so I think making sure that you are doing a thorough evaluation process to get it right.
Okay. And I have one other question, if I could. And my son worked as an RBT in Omaha, and so he'd done that for 2 years. Now he's working in the school system as a para, and working with kids with disabilities as well. But he saw a big difference in what he could help that child with right in the classroom. And I know it takes a special type of person, I think, sometimes to work with maybe kids who are more have maybe severe on the spectrum. Do you see the training different for maybe some people, or maybe it's just that maybe they just have that within them, some of the RBTs? I don't know. Do you see that?
We try to hire that right type of person for the position. We want them to stay with us for a long time. So we're looking for those people who really care about working with individuals with disabilities. And so I think that we're investing that upfront time in order to find our providers that are going to stay with us for a long time.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we don't, through this, if we're going to cut the rates, that we're not going to see a decline in people who, who would be able to work in that field. If their wages are lowered and now they can see they can get a different job in some other area. And I don't know if that's something that you would look at. You would have to lower wages for RBTs or to meet.
We have to consider everything at this point in time. It's not really easy at the university to decrease salaries. And so it's not probably something that's at the top of our list, but we have to cover costs. So, we want to look at every option on the table first before we ever look at that potential. So that is not at the top of our list. But we have to make sure that we meet our ends.
Senator McClure.
Thank you, Chairman Hardin. Just kind of following through with my previous questions. If someone's diagnosed as autistic, is there much of an incidence of misdiagnosis? I mean, if someone initially is diagnosed as autistic, is there opportunity for them not to be autistic and come off the spectrum? Or is that something you encounter? Or once you're autistic, you're stamped forever as autistic? What's your incidence of folks being misdiagnosed?
At MMI, we very low incidence of misdiagnosis.
Does it happen?
I'm sure that it happens out in the community
You
across the
have
United States. We invest a lot in our autism diagnostic process. Typically, it's about 4 hours of the actual evaluation time. And before that, we've done a thorough interview with families. So we spend a lot of time making sure that we get it right. We don't want to give someone a diagnosis flippantly that is not accurate. So we do not have that problem at MMI. There are challenging situations where someone might have autism, but also might have another significant disability on top of it, a cognitive impairment on top of it. And so teasing out the nuance of, is it one, is it two, is it three things? Sometimes that gets a little bit tricky. And so there are times that we'll have someone come back like, okay, it's been a year or two, you're a little bit older, let's take a look again, so that we can make sure that we have considered everything and are looking at them at different ages.
I'm not implying that once,
Yeah.
we're not going to let them go. We got them now. We're not going to let them go. But just what is the process for identifying someone, just briefly, that is in the autism spectrum? What is the process?
They are doing a thorough speech and language evaluation, looking at social engagement, as well as the behaviors that they're encountering. And so typically the process is with the BCBA licensed psychologist and a speech language pathologist to do that full thorough evaluation.
Then there's just a full spectrum of tests that they do that is relatively universal with all.
Yeah. The ADOS is our standard test that we use. And then depending on the age of the child, it would determine which speech and language tests that they're receiving. They're made for different ages, so that would vary.
Thank you.
Yeah, Senator Valley.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for being here. Can you talk a little bit about how MMI works with families and parents to provide resources outside of clinic?
For families that we are providing the service at MMI, our ABA team works closely with our families to help with carryover at home. They'll also go out and depending on the timing of that intervention, they'll go to the schools, they'll go to different locations to help practice those skills in real life situations. We also have a care coordination team that includes social workers, parent resource coordinators, interpreters, that we ensure all of our families have access to so that they can connect them with other resources in the community. So if we can't offer a certain service, that we're making sure that we tell them where they can get that. And so all of our families have access to those care coordination services the entire time they're at MMI.
Okay, thank you. And I do have one more question. And it's about cost. You've mentioned costs are rising. It's the world we live in right now. But I'm struggling to wrap my mind around the business model of these providers. So in my mind, the economy of scale, if you're having more diagnosis, your reimbursement rates should match. So can you kind of outline your costs? Are most of them 2 salaries of providers? Senator Myers talked about overhead. Can you just help me wrap my head around? Because I don't have business in this field, so it's hard for me to understand.
Yeah, everyone would be working with a frontline registered behavior technician. So that would be automatic for all of our patients. Depending on the severity and what their needs are, kind of determines how much of that extra support they need. Is it one BCBA that helps? Do we need an extra set of hands in there if behaviors are more significant? So depending on the needs they have, we might have to bring in more supervision at time. We also have speech pathologists, occupational therapists that'll come into the programs, provide services to, and then they'll be kind of sharing the techniques with the registered behavior technicians so that all of that work can be carried over. So it isn't an exact science for the same amount for every single child. It really depends on how much support they need based on the severity or individual needs they have.
Okay, so just more costs could currently go into one more child.
Right.
than it
Depending
has
on
in
where
the
they're
past
at, what severity level, what needs they have, we might be providing more supervision, more BCBA support to them.
Okay, thank you.
Every situation is different, right?
Yep.
Can you give us some broad strokes of the brush on frequency of modality for people in need of these services?
Frequency of modality of
How often should someone be seen in a week, or how many hours in a week, or in a month, or that type of thing, given the context that 100 different people have 100 different situations? I'm asking you to speak in generalities for me.
So generally at MMI, probably our average is around 18 to 20 hours a week. Usually we don't go over 22 is kind of our max, but it really depends on age. And, when children are at school age, we're not trying to keep them out of school in order to do ABA. We're trying to supplement, help them be ready to learn in the school system. So typically we're doing like a half day throughout that week. So they'll spend half of their day in school, and then they'll spend half of their day getting some one-on-one intervention. So that 22 is kind of our max. There are times, unique circumstances that we've got some really significant needs that we might ask for more, but we're really trying to decrease the intensity when that child's ready, with the goal is to not need to participate in ABA ongoing, to get them back into their environment with their peers.
You mentioned a wait list earlier. Can I be snoopy and just kind of ask, if I'm needing your services, how long of a wait list could we be looking at? A wait time?
It can be 9 months to a year for evaluation to get a diagnosis, which is tough because you can't then get services until you have a diagnosis. So we're really trying to put things in place in order to decrease that time to get families in a more timely manner. For services, then, it can be a little bit longer. There are greater services for young children in the metro area. So we do not have as long of a wait list for toddlers. But once those kids are school age, we're finding it could be years waiting for services.
I'm thankful MMI is here in Nebraska. Do you serve people from outside Nebraska? I'm guessing Iowa for sure.
Yeah, we do get a lot from Iowa, Council Bluffs area. You know, it just seems to be kind of a Twin City kind of dual approach there. Primarily Nebraska, though. We're committed to also trying to extend across the entire state. So we started with our 90th and Q location as our toddler clinic, and then we started our 50th and Ames clinic. Last year, we opened up a clinic in Fremont. So we're looking at the viability of those models so that we can work with our cities throughout Nebraska from a staffing standpoint, and then we can help from a training and offer those services. But it has to be a model that's sustainable. Putting a building up, paying rent, all of that really isn't covering the cost from a reimbursement standpoint. So we work a lot with granting agencies or philanthropic donations in order to do the upfront cost of that build, and then looking at the ongoing costs from a reimbursement standpoint.
Are you seeing ABA challenges across the industry, across America, wider than Nebraska? What are you seeing?
Yes, I would say that some of the things we see in Nebraska are not unique. Increased diagnosis, increased demand. I'm not personally an ABA provider, so I don't, I'm not in that data world as much as some of my peers are, but I think that's generally, we see some of the same trends across the United States.
Did MMI interface with our Department of Health and Human Services in regards to rate conversations?
We are not working directly with Medicaid on rates. We have worked with Medicaid on trying to support best practice moving forward.
Okay, gotcha. And did someone raise a hand over here?
Peter, go ahead.
Okay.
Roll.
I didn't want to cheat you out of an opportunity. I'll come back. What are your thoughts on these rates?
I mean, they'll be hard, to be honest, but we're up for the challenge. When we, as a part of UNMC, member of the University of Nebraska system, when a challenge comes up, we try to learn what we can and adjust and do the best we can, and then train others how to manage that. So that's really the approach we took. Is if this is our next challenge right now, how are we going to work around it? We're not trying to cut ABA services, and so what do we need to do in order to make that happen? If we need to look at a different supervision model in order to make that happen, we have to explore that, but not to compromise services. That's never something that we'll put on the table.
Senator Reapy.
Thank you, sir. I grew up in a different era. I grew up in a different kind of culture, very small rural agricultural community, but we had never heard of autism. When did it come into, because it's so prevalent now, when did it all of a sudden become more diagnosed and then more services and everything else? So I'm just trying to sort out, was there some factor in there that drove this? I mean, I don't want to ask Robert F. Kennedy Jr. what that might have been, but what decade? I would give you a wide decade. Was it the 60s, the 70s, 50s?
I think we started to see some of the biggest uptick in the 2000s.
2000?
Now, through many training programs that are not BCBA specifically, didn't have additional classes on autism early on, but since then you will see specific training classes on autism from many different professions, as ABA isn't the only profession that works with individuals with autism. So I think you started to see a huge uptick then with additional investment in training providers. And then diagnostic criteria got better, research got better. And so I think that we have we've really seen a huge uptick since that point in time.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Senator Quick?
And just talking about that, do you think some children or people in back in the day were misdiagnosed as maybe an intellectual disability, maybe put into well, we used to have the regional centers. And you think that could have happened too? I mean, autism just didn't
Right.
overnight happen. I mean,
Right.
I think it's been going on, and I think
Right.
uh,
I do think that there is an increase, and so it probably wasn't high then with a whole bunch of misdiagnosis at that time, but the likelihood that some of those cases happened, yeah, it's probably likely.
okay.
Seeing no other questions, thank you for being
Thank you.
here.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Corey Cords. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairperson and members of the committee. Thank you, Senator Hardin, for the invitation to speak. I'm Dr. Corey Cohrs, C-O-R-E-Y, Cohrs, C-O-H-R-S. I've worked in the field of ABA for over 15 years and founded Radical Minds in 2016. We are a Nebraska-based clinician-led provider serving young children with autism. Today, we employ over 100 staff and have supported hundreds of families in the Omaha area. When ABA is delivered appropriately, individualized, developmentally aligned, and clinically accountable, it is highly effective. But how services are structured matters just as how they're funded. For years, Nebraska had some of the highest Medicaid reimbursement rates in the nation. Those rates did attract more providers, but they also shaped delivery models that emphasize billing over outcomes. We saw hours expanded to 30 to 40 hours a week by default. Supervision billed heavily, but often remote or perfunctory. And services pivoted to group or in-home sessions more to fill staff schedules than to reflect individualized client need. Families understandably trusted what was offered, especially when insurance approvals reinforced the perception of necessity. But approval don't equal necessity. Policy must be built on what works, not just what gets billed. It is important to note that the original 40-hour standard traces back to a small study in the 1980s with methods like physical aversives that we would never allow today. Since then, decades of research have shown that ABA works best when individualized. Some children may need more hours, but many succeed with 20 when therapy is delivered with fidelity. Suggesting that every child requires 40 hours is not evidence-based. It's a billing model, not a clinical one. When therapy is stretched to maximum hours without meaningful oversight, it risks drifting from individualized intervention to something closer to custodial care. This is not what families deserve, and it is not sustainable. Right now, families are often able to access services quickly, but that immediate access sometimes comes at the expense of quality. High-hour models, thin supervision, and billing-driven structures can make it look like capacity has improved, when in reality, children are always receiving the individualized, effective care they need. Sustainability must mean more than availability. It must mean quality care that produces meaningful outcomes. And this issue goes beyond Medicaid. These billing practices are distorting the broader market, driving up labor rates and affecting what private insurers are willing to reimburse. When unsustainable models set the baseline, every payer and every family feels the ripple effect. Other states have already shown where this road can lead. Services hijacked by financial models, including private equity ownership, that prioritize high hours and billing over outcomes. Nebraska cannot afford to repeat this mistake. If rate restoration is considered, it must come with clear standards, supervision that is real and accountable, not just billed, intensity aligned with clinical need, not default hours, structures that reward outcomes, not volume. At Radical Minds, we prescribe hours based on clinical need, maintain Nebraska-based supervision, and measure success by meaningful outcomes for children and families, not by billing output. This isn't about blaming providers, it's about protecting families and ensuring Nebraska builds a system that is both effective and sustainable. Nebraska has the chance to set a national example when families can trust and providers can stand behind. Thank you. I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you. Questions? Senator Frederickson.
Thank you, Mr. Hardin. Thank you, Dr. Cohrs, for being here, for testifying. I think you made a really astute point that resonated with me, and certainly what I've heard a lot is it seems to be what's most effective with ABA, and tell me if you disagree, is when treatment plan is obviously individualized to the patient to kind of meet their individual needs. Some kiddos that might be 10 hours a week, I'm hearing some maybe 20, kind of just depending on severity, et cetera. That's what I've heard. It seems like from everyone who's testified today, but I heard you mention kind of this idea of prescribing 40 hours a week for every single child in ABA. Can you help me understand that a little bit more? Because I haven't been hearing that today.
Understand how that's happening or what is happening?
Or yeah, can you shed some light on that a bit more?
For instance, we've had a family come to us recently that had been to 6 different companies and was only exclusively offered 40 hours per week. So in many cases, this is a mandate, not a clinical prescription. There are been reports of us by both staff and clients that is in many cases the only option.
Okay. So you're saying there's ABA providers that are telling families the only way you can be seen here or admitted here is through the 40-hour-a-week model. Am I hearing
Correct.
that correct? Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Other questions? Senator Ballard?
Thank you, Dr. Cordes. Thank you, Chairman. Are you able to work with the department on making sure that your type of individual service is reimbursed accordingly? So instead of having, you're saying that a lot of providers say we need 40 hours because our reimbursements need to hit here. So are you able to make the individual service that your clients need and get reimbursed at the same level? That question makes sense?
Kind of.
Yes.
Can you clarify?
Yeah, I'm just trying to wrap my head around cost of providing service,
Mhm.
and the reimbursement rates equal those costs. I don't want providers to lose money
Mhm.
per se, but also I don't want middlemen, as the chairman said, is opening middlemen to pocket
Right.
the excess. So I'm just trying to understand, making sure that you're providing services that equal your cost, but also providing quality services and access to care.
Yes. Can I answer? Can I?
However you want. Yes.
I think one of the questions that was asked earlier was what's the average of cost to employ an RVT. Can I answer that? Just
Yes.
to give you some perspective.
Yes.
So to my knowledge, and I do 99% of the interviews for the RVTs that come into our company. So I would say we have a high acceptance rate, and based on my knowledge, the median or average rate of pay for an RVT on an hourly schedule is about $25 an hour, on a salary at about $19 an hour. You can take that and subtract it from $144 and see what the margin is. That's a high margin, and it's one that far exceeds most private insurance rates, and it also exceeds TRICARE, and it exceeds, as we've seen, the national average for Medicaid. The arguments behind why these rates need to be restored to their full capacity in order to be effective in maintaining access to care is simply because, in my opinion, when other providers enter the area, there was and remains a shortage of BCBAs in the state. In order to effectively compete at winning talent to your organization, the best way to do that is to offer higher compensation packages. If you build a caseload that is heavily dependent upon the highest reimbursement rate possible, you can offer the highest compensation packages possible. When those reimbursement rates are reduced, it's going to upset your business model. We have set our business model by modeling off the average of all reimbursement rates for all private insurers and Medicaid. So all of our salary and pay is based on the aggregate and not based on a single payer.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
So do you provide services yourself? Are you a provider?
I'm a BCBA, but I do not provide clinical. I mean, occasional supervision, but not day-to-day supervision or practice.
You used an interesting term a few times in what you were sharing there at the beginning, the term group.
Yes.
Unpack group for me. What's that look like?
Group services. To my knowledge, there are providers whom all of our services that we offer are scheduled on a one-to-one basis. We build access into our schedule such that if someone is sick or unavailable that day, there is still someone to fill in for that session. We never pivot to a group session and then give families something they weren't expecting or isn't necessarily what was planned for that day. Whereas my understanding is that other providers will pivot to a group session in place of an individual session that was initially scheduled. However, if that's to be done, it should be done with the same level of clinical necessity and programming that reflects purpose for doing a group, not just simply a pivot.
Are there providers using group contexts for essentially what amounts to childcare?
In my opinion, yes.
And yet they operate without the accountabilities that go along with being a childcare center.
Correct. It is my understanding that there are in many cases things such as naps and meals that would typically be accompanied by a childcare facility.
And those are billed at,
I'm not inside of the organization to review the billing to know for sure.
okay. But you've had anecdotally stories shared with you from people who come to you for services and are probably surprised to find out that there's individual care as opposed to group care.
Correct. And I would say most of those reflect a combination from what I have heard of group and individual care.
What's your reaction to a 2,000% rate increase in Nebraska in these categories between 2020 and 2024?
What's my reaction to them?
Yeah, a 2,000% increase. As I understand, we went from below 5 million a year to, $89 million a year in about 4 years. And I'm just saying, you're in the biz.
I think it reflects a high overutilization. I would be very interested in seeing the data on how access to care is reflected in the number of children being served, how that number changed each year, year over year, compared to in proportion to the amount of billed revenue or services billed per year, year over year. My speculation would be that the billing cost rose disproportionately to the number of children actually receiving access to care, but that's just my speculation.
Just curious, do you have a sense in terms of how many provider organizations are in Nebraska?
My best guess would probably be around 20 in the Omaha area.
Okay. And I'm just, in your world, how many of your patients, clients that you work with are Medicaid eligible?
Eligible or enrolled?
Okay, either one, both.
Enrolled roughly about 19% the last time I checked.
Okay, very good. About how many use private insurance?
Private pay
Yeah.
or private insurance? Private pay 0, but private insurance would make up, depending on whether you include TRICARE, private pay or government funded, would make up the other, roughly 80%.
Okay. As a provider organization, do you have interaction with CMS on a regular basis? What's that feel like, look like?
I'm sorry, interactions with whom?
With Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services?
No.
Okay. All right. What are the qualifications for various ABA services?
To be an RBT, you need a high school diploma followed by a 40-hour training that can be completed on, or is most often completed online.
A 40-hour training?
40-hour training.
Okay.
A competency exam, which although it has the word exam, is an oral exam, so to speak, or an exam of demonstration, not an exam of written capacity, followed by an exam that you take at the Pearson Testing Center.
Okay.
To be a BCBA, you need a master's degree, followed by, I believe it's 1,500 or 2,000 hours of supervised experience. I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head, followed by taking the exam.
What are you hearing from parents about these changes since August?
I think a lot of our parents, the parents that we see, we're not the first stop they've made either in their intake process, trying to find a provider, or in where they've started services and then since left. And I think we've seen a lot of parents that are discouraged by the quality of what they're seeing. Discouragement, I think, is the best word that I can use.
Same question I've asked earlier, but give us a flavor for what happens in an ABA interaction, let's say in an RBT setting. What goes on?
That's going to vary by the child, needless to say. The RBT receives a treatment plan, and in our case, we take that with the treatment plan. It's going to set 6-month goals. Those goals are then broken down into daily session plans, and those daily session plans set targets based on the treatment goals, and then they have programs assigned to them. So the RBT is given very specific instructions, at least at our company, on how to run different protocols to target the targets of different programs. So for instance, we might do a matching program in which you have a set of stimuli on the table, and the child is asked to match one to the other, either by identical or non-identical matching. Depending on where the kid's at in their programming, all of our sessions are based on the treatment plan that would derive from the assessment before the kid started services with us, which would have identified any gaps in their social communication and language. That's kind of a high-level answer, then
Sure.
maybe more so than what you were looking
It varies, and know that it has to. How do you set your rates? Is it an hourly thing, a per visit thing? How does that work in the industry?
Rate of
I'm thinking
hours,
of getting involved because it sounds like it's been pretty good.
rate of
As an
hours,
entrepreneur, I mean, is that a per hour, a per session? How does that work?
rate of hours or rate of reimbursement?
Yes.
The most
Unpack it for
hours,
me.
the most hours that we see a child for are 20 hours a week.
20 hours a week.
So that would be 8 to 12, 5 days a week. That's the most that we do.
Okay.
The afternoons, our max sessions run 1 to 4. So that'd be 15 hours a week. So we don't have any kids between noon and 1. All of them are between either between the hours of 8 and 12 and 1 or 1 to 4. Some of them can be 8 to 11, 9 to 12. And then they can be, say, 2 days a week, 3 days a week, 5 days a week. So the exact hours that the kid received is based on both the results of their assessment that tells us an idea of the gap between their chronological and developmental age based on their social and language skills, and then also consultation with the parents and the other providers such as OT, PT, speech. And part of the reason that we do that is to allow time for the child to see other professions such as the occupational therapist, the speech therapist. And if we were to see them for 40 hours a week, they wouldn't have those opportunities, or to have opportunities for socialization or mainstream education. The rates, a lot of those are contracted. So we just we try to negotiate, but given the overutilization that's happened over the last few years, I'd say it becomes increasingly difficult to negotiate with private payers, to negotiate rates, because they see the demand as being filled beyond, or the supply is being filled to meet the demand. So our rates are kind of what we're offered. And that's what we set our model is based on the aggregate of those rates.
Background checks?
Yes.
And
Well, we have both our standard one source background checks, and then we also have the DHHS background check for childcare providers.
Senator Reapy.
Thank you. I hear everyone talking about a 5-day week. I come from the hospital side of healthcare, which is 24/7, 365. Do you have clients that require more than 5 days a week? I mean, it doesn't seem to me like it can be that intense for 5 days and then drop off for 2.
Mm-hmm. That's a little, so I would say that to my knowledge, there's not evidence to support that going beyond a certain number of hours per week would lead to beneficial outcomes or to more superior outcomes. So I think from a evidence-based clinical perspective, there isn't really a need to go to that Saturday and Sunday. I think it's more analogous to how kids only go to school for 5 days a week instead of 7. I don't think that from a practical point of view that we would have parents that would necessarily agree to that. And it would be a very difficult thing to staff and provide supervision for as well, which is something that's very important to us, is being able to provide on-site quality supervision during our sessions. And so we wouldn't want to offer services at a time where we couldn't staff that appropriately.
I'm not sure it's a good comparison, but oftentimes restaurants are open on the weekends and then they're closed on Monday because that's when the need is there. So I'm looking at this thing more for what's the needs of the family than I am the wants of the staff.
Yeah, I hear that. I think depending on what the goals are for the child, I think is relevant. If you're talking about addressing concerns of maladaptive behavior, which occur in the home, I think, yeah, there should probably be some modification to the client schedule. If we're simply targeting acquisition of language and and social skills, I don't know that those are things that necessarily need to be worked on outside of those hours or days.
Okay, thank you.
Do you
Appreciate you
know,
being here.
does Nebraska require, when there is, for example, an RBT that goes to a home setting, does Nebraska require that a responsible adult be in that home at the same time that the RBT is in the home?
And I'm not sure that there's a regulation stating that that's a requirement. So I'm not sure that is a requirement. It's something that we would certainly expect, and I'm not sure how that works with other providers.
I was just curious.
Yeah, it absolutely would be best practice. I don't think that would be appropriate. That would be bordering on respite care.
Okay. Senator Meyer.
Thank you, Chairman. Kind of following up on what Senator Hardin was asking. a determination of therapy. I'm sure there's an evaluation and different therapies for different levels and different challenges. Are these sessions filmed at all? Is there peer review? Are there supervisor reviews? We look at outcomes. This is a therapy. We're not getting outcome. Why not? We're looking at background checks for our RBTs, and so not everyone is equally talented regardless of their qualifications in providing that type of therapy. So is there any oversight, I guess, is what I'm asking with regard to a random selection of taped sessions, or are the sessions taped at all?
We don't tape our sessions. I can't speak for what others do. I'd say that all of our BCBAs are in the clinic. So us personally, we don't provide in-home services, except for on the rare occasion that it's towards the end of services and we're transitioning the client and doing parent training in the home. Beyond that, all of our services are in the clinic, and I say that because all of our BCBAs are in the clinic. So we don't provide any telehealth or remote supervision. Every BCBA is on site, and then providing more than adequate supervision to the client to ensure that the programs are being run effectively and the way that they're supposed to be. They're also reviewing their daily from each session. They're reviewing session data daily, the BCBA is, and then making changes for the next day. So there are no gaps where the data as to how the client responded is going, days or weeks without being reviewed and then modifications made to ensure that we're making effective treatment decisions. Even with the BCBA, and this is one of the things that I think is so pivotal and why it's important to have a BCBA in the site, on site in the clinic, is because even when they're not providing supervision to a client that if they're focused on client A right now, but they need to shift their focus and they hear that there's something gone awry with client B, they can shift and pivot and then address an issue in the moment. So our BCBAs are available even if they're not doing planned supervision and they're, say, in their office treatment planning. They can leave their office if they get a request from an RBT to go address something that's happening in that moment. So we try to prevent problems rather than trying to address them later.
Thank you.
Senator Quick.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. So I talked a little bit earlier about my son worked as an RBT, and he worked directly in the school system and then also did work in the clinic like during the summertime. Do you have any RBTs that work directly in the schools with the client?
We do not. We've had that request be made. My only condition when responding to those requests was that I wanted to have the opportunity and the assurances that I could provide consistent quality oversight. And I don't, at least the district that I was working with at the time, I don't think we necessarily, I think that's not necessarily what they wanted. I think they kind of wanted the path of least resistance to have. And I think one of the reasons that we don't is because we want to make sure that we're providing ABA therapeutic services and not something that blurs the line with something else. And I think when we are talking about ABA services that are medically funded to treat a diagnosis of autism, I think it's important to note that just simply having an autism diagnosis should not be the only qualifier for receiving ABA services. As I'm sure Senator Frederickson could potentially reinforce here, a lot of people have an anxiety disorder. That doesn't necessarily mean that they receive their ongoing therapy services once they've met their goals, or they're no longer presenting a challenge in their daily living. We need to be working on addressing the core symptoms of autism, being social and communication, maladaptive behavior, and restrictive and stereotypical behavior. If we are simply sitting with a child, helping them to stay on task during their schoolwork, that's not addressing one of those concerns. So although ABA can be effective for a wide range of children, I think when it is medically funded, it needs to be appropriately targeted on the things that it's intended to be.
And I do know he worked directly with these BCBA. They were in communication quite a bit to make sure that
in many cases it's done appropriately. Yeah. It's just the ones that aren't.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? What have we missed?
I'd be interested in addressing your question on the rise of autism prevalence.
Okay.
I think there's some nuance to this question. And I think that when I first took a class on autism, it was circa 2008, 2009. And the autism rate was around, I think, 101 and 120, which was startling at the time because it was a rise from what had been in previous years. So yes, we've seen an exponential rise in the autism diagnosis rate since then to now at 1 in 36. I think there is a much better awareness. There's much better awareness. Having said that, I think that there are also situations that blur the line. We've seen countless diagnostic reports that come from providers that don't use not even gold standard, but let alone objective measures to determine an autism diagnosis. A lot of these we have to send back because we can't get them approved by the insurance company to get ABA services approved. However, historically, some will with even a weak diagnostic report such as that. So in many cases, I want to acknowledge and praise that what MMI is doing at the Autism Diagnostic Center should be the gold standard for diagnosis. However, unfortunately, most providers in an outpatient setting don't have 4 hours to spend doing a diagnosis. As a result, what I think you see is often a reliance upon an assessment. And then if there's even a gray area where we fall on the line, then let's sway to the side of being able to provide services by giving a diagnosis as opposed to swaying on the side of not giving a diagnosis because that would inhibit the kid from receiving services. So I think it's a little bit more nuanced than simply just a genetic component that's probably given a rise, which I don't deny exists. I think the last thing that I'll say, just when you said, what did I miss? I think what I would like to see is, I personally as a provider, is I would like to see legislation that addresses appropriate utilization, addresses remote supervision, and acknowledges or through value-based reimbursement, some form of just quality differences between the services that are being rendered. No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you for being here. Kristen Rose from Sidney, Nebraska. That's way out west.
Not quite as far as you.
Well, just pretty far. Thank you for being here. Welcome.
My name is Kristen Rose, Kristenrose, and I'm a licensed independent mental health practitioner in Sidney, Nebraska. I'm also the Public Policy and Legislation Chair for Nebraska Counseling Association and a member of the Nebraska Association for Behavioral Health Organizations. I want to thank Senator Hardin and the committee for initiating this interim study, which is vital to exploring if there are adequate behavioral health services for Nebraska families. There may be some questions from the committee about why a counselor would be advocating for applied behavioral analysis. I should explain that shortly after graduating with my bachelor's degree in 2006, I worked for Behaven, one of the prominent ABA agencies in the state, so I'm not unfamiliar with the benefits of these services. Behavioral health professionals rarely exist in a silo, and we often coordinate multiple avenues of care, including ABA services, to provide the best interventions. As a counselor, I'm an advocate for all behavioral health services and expanding these services to meet the high demand. Applied behavioral analysis is probably best known to benefit those who have been diagnosed on the autism spectrum. However, ABA has been used to treat a wide range of behavioral health issues, including attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, PICA, intellectual disabilities, substance use, and traumatic brain injuries. ABA therapy, much like other behavioral health interventions and therapies, can be provided in multiple settings, including schools and homes. Research has demonstrated that ABA can improve social interactions, learn new skills, increase positive behaviors, and lessen challenging behaviors. Early intervention with ABA produces gains in development and reduces the need for special services later in life. Early intervention is where the challenge lies. There are approximately 17,300 youths diagnosed on the autism spectrum in the state that would benefit from services with only enough ABA professionals to cover about a quarter of those youth. That does not account for any of the other behavioral health diagnoses that might benefit from ABA therapy. Families wanting early interventions are likely to face long wait lists if there are even ABA services available in their area. I spoke with an ABA provider based in Sidney, Nebraska, who is not currently practicing. She explained to me that there's significant need, but there are challenges to providing these services in rural and frontier areas of the state. For example, she had to drive 2 hours to a client to provide 2 hours of services and then drive 2 hours home. The ABA company she was working for paid her hourly, but not for travel expenses. The provider also explained to me that the company she was working for did not have any local offices, which made logistics and communication difficult at times. This provider communicated the necessary intensity of these services and gave several examples of how her clients benefited from therapy. She stated that she loved it, but as a single mom, it was difficult for her to meet financial demands on her pay. When I asked her what she feels is the most important thing for the committee to know, her reply was, there needs to be significantly more providers with offices in multiple areas of the state. With reimbursement reductions, it is an unfortunate reality that we will see a contraction of ABA services and families will be left without life-changing services. Nebraska should be focusing on expanding behavioral health services across all areas, all regions of the state, including and especially applied behavioral analysis. I appreciate your time you have spent hearing testimony in consideration of how ABA services impacts families.
Thank you. Questions? Senator Frederickson.
Thank you, Chair Hardin. Thank you for being here and for providing testimony. I'm kind of digesting a lot of what we've heard today, and it's interesting. I'm almost feeling this as almost like two separate issues, right? I mean, so one is kind of this conversation about rates that we have for ABA historically in our state and possible adjustments to those rates to sort of be more reflective to sister states or more on board with that. But then I'm also hearing this other narrative about kind of this debate about ABA itself, right? And sort of like what's the clinically indicated treatment, et cetera. And from what I've heard is that it seems like everyone who's testified today is sort of in line with this idea that it's incredibly individualized. The amount of hours a patient needs is going to vary depending on what the patient's age is, their developmental ability, like their skill set, all these things. But I've also been hearing like there seems to be this energy or idea that there's like perhaps I don't know if I want to say like bad actors out there, but this idea that there are maybe clinics or organizations that are perhaps providing or advertising they're providing ABA and are doing so in such a way that might not be clinically appropriate, or in that they're doing this because they're getting rich off of this or some way. And I'm just curious, as someone who comes from a more rural part of the state so I come from Omaha, right? Mm-hmm. So if we lose some national providers, for example, we do have fortunately resources in Omaha, but I do understand that in the rural parts of the state, I've always thought we've tried to attract providers to Nebraska. So there's this dance we have to do here, right? So can you just, I don't know, maybe shed some light on what are your thoughts on that?
So in the RBT that I spoke with, the company she was working for was actually out of Omaha, but okay. I mean, given the 5-hour difference, and I've seen a lot of well-intentioned providers come from kind of the eastern side of the state to the western side of the state, and the culture's different, the travel times are different, logistics are very different. Uh-huh. And I don't know that they're necessarily bad actors, but maybe they don't understand kind of everything that may need to go into providing the resources necessary. If we had a higher density of RBTs, she wouldn't have spent 4 hours traveling and she could have served more children. And I don't know that agencies that are not physically present in that area of the state necessarily kind of understand everything that needs to be implemented in those parts of the state. So I think there's good intentions, but I think there's a little bit of a cultural kind of translation issue, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I think so. Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Senator Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. Thank you for driving all this way. You mentioned that there is not enough ABA professionals to treat all the youth that are diagnosed. Can you talk a little bit about the educational pipeline? What is NAPCO doing to try to get individuals interested in this line of work?
So NAPCO, I think we're just kind of dipping our toes in the water, and Julie may have to correct that a little bit, but it is like, because we just standardized kind of the licensing process in the state, even though we've been present in the state for quite some time. I think that there is, again, it falls under the umbrella of behavioral health services, and we're an advocate for all of them. And how do we meet that demand? I don't know that I've seen the Behavioral Health Education Center of Nebraska dip their toes in that water either. And I don't know if there's any interest in that. They are kind of our driving agency for increasing workforce.
Thank you.
Senator Meyer?
Thank you, Chairman Hardin. Given the difficulty of delivery of services in outstate Nebraska, what would you do? What would you suggest that the state do, the legislature do, communities do to attract more providers to the western part of the state? What's the magic bullet? And there probably is none, but what would you suggest we do to increase the number of providers in our underserved communities?
I think part of it is you have to have heart to be there. It's not for everybody.
Isn't that a state motto? It's not for everybody.
I'm pretty sure we have more cows than people in the panhandle, but so you have to be used to being alone. But I think there is a misconception that it is more affordable to live in rural areas. Our housing costs might be more affordable, but our gas and our groceries are more expensive. We're more likely to have to travel for services. I recently looked at the data on what school districts spend per student, and Sydney Public Schools spends almost $3,000 more per year per student than Millard Public Schools. So, I mean, the reality is we can say it's more affordable, but impractical, is it? And so pay is a big factor in that. You have to be able to make a living. Housing is a massive issue in rural areas, and land prices are going up. So even if you were to buy a piece of land to build on, it's going to be more expensive. So, I mean, and that's where the reimbursement rates do come into play. People have to be able to survive.
And if I may, Chairman, I just one other question currently. And you're probably not in a position to answer this, and maybe no one in this room is in a position to answer this, but as far as the need for services on a per capita basis, is it different in our urban areas as compared to our more rural areas? Is that a factor? If there is a difference, is that a factor of diagnoses or the availability of someone to do a diagnosis? Is there a discrepancy on a per capita basis with our children or anyone for that matter on a diagnosis basis? Do you have any idea at all?
Having grown up in Omaha and then being out in Sydney, I think in rural and frontier areas, mental health and behavioral health diagnoses are being destigmatized significantly. I think that's accounted for a lot of the wait lists and a lot of the increase in diagnoses. I was very, very surprised. I thought when I moved to Sydney that nobody would want to come and see me because it's a small town. Nobody wants to come in my office. And I have had a wait list since before I even started there. So I think there's a destigmatization happening, that it's more acceptable to be seen getting help. It's more socially acceptable, like, hey, my kid is struggling with this and these are the services that they need, rather than, oh no, they're perfectly fine, like we'll just shove them in a regular classroom.
I was hoping you'd say we're much better adjusted in the rural community as compared to the urban community. Evidently my colleague over here disagrees with that.
Can I ask, I get it because there's an individualized world out there on the continuum, and this person today, they needed something very different, not only in 2 months, but 2 weeks from where they are right now. But can you help us along? Take us by the hand. Don't think of every situation. Think of just one situation. Paint the picture for us. What does a therapy session entail, look like? And just to help those of us who are struggling, we can see the words and spell them. We just don't know what they mean.
Mm-hmm.
Paint that picture for us. What's a therapy session look like?
So are we talking psychotherapy or ABA therapy?
Let's talk ABA therapy.
Okay. And it's been 20 years since I have been involved, but, and at Behaven, I worked at the physical standing building, if you will. But I also worked in homes and schools. So I actually did kind of the full spectrum. And the children that were there for 40 hours a week, those were the children that their diagnoses so significantly impacted their life that they could not be successful in any setting, not even daycare and alternative school. It was a very intensive environment. And then at times those kids transitioned down to home-based and school-based therapy. I worked with one child, I don't know, this child just sticks out in my mind for some reason, that I was at her home or school anywhere from 5 to 10 hours a week, depending on the intensity of kind of what was going on. And she transitioned back to pretty much normal life. So it was very individualized.
Okay. We know that the diagnosis rates are going up much, much higher, and that's no different out where we are in that part of the world. Were you surprised by the 2,000% increase in that category between 2020 and 2024? I mean, what was your reaction?
Some and not some. I think with the rate increase, I think it did attract companies that were saying, hey, like we can meet the demand in rural areas. And then I think they possibly came off as bad actors because they didn't kind of understand the nuanced culture that happens in Nebraska. Again,
The nuanced culture where we don't like to be taken for a ride, is that the one you're referring to?
yes.
Okay.
And I don't think they fully understood kind of the distance between traveling to provide the services. I mean, you're paying somebody for an 8-hour day and they only provided service for 2 kids. That's hard.
Yeah. Therefore, perhaps we need to make adjustment in terms of how that happens. If you're a few minutes from one situation to the next, as opposed to a couple hours, as you were indicating earlier, from one experience to the next. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions, Senator Quick?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So what do you feel the impact will be from maybe the rate cuts? And have you heard from any families with concerns about what they feel, maybe questions about what's going to happen?
I've heard concerns about agencies about how they're going to kind of financially survive. I think with any healthcare profession, when you see a rate that drastically cut, you're looking at how do I increase my caseload, which increases the risk of burnout, or do I just give it up and walk away?
Curious, how many of your clients can you kind of divide it up in a basic percentage of Medicaid or private insurance? What's that look like out west?
Oh, my personal caseload is probably close to 70% Medicaid. I want to say overall at the hospital, it's probably at least half.
Okay, gotcha. And do you have a sense in terms of, is there a concern or even a knowledge out there that the federal government is essentially waving a flag federally? Is this common knowledge, I guess? Were you aware of the Indiana and Wisconsin situations before? Okay. So, very good. What did we miss?
Nothing off the top of my head.
Or sure we did. We all stayed in a Holiday Inn Express last night, but we appreciate you being here because we need to be talked. So thank you.
Thank you.
Mario Fernandez. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Hardin, members of the committee. My name is Mariel Fernandez, Mariel Fernandez. I am Vice President of Government Affairs for the Council of Autism Service Providers, a nonprofit trade association of autism service provider organizations with 425 member organizations across all 50 states, including many here in Nebraska. CAS has a demonstrated commitment to promoting and delivering evidence-based care. I'm also a board-certified behavior analyst who is licensed to practice in my home state of Texas. Thank you for having me. I've been working in the field since 2001 and I have been board certified since 2004. So I've been doing this a long time. DHHS referenced CASP in its decision to adjust the applied behavior analysis rates and use graphs, which I personally researched and compiled during the summer of 2024. I have provided the updated 2025 rate comparison data to DHHS on July 18th, August 1st, and August 29th, and I have provided you with a copy of that data that was updated as of Thursday, when we saw some additional rate changes be published actually in the state of California. I'm thankful for the opportunity to be here and share our concerns with the recent ABA rate reductions. And to be clear, most of what you've heard from DHHS today is correct. The Nebraska rates were exponentially higher than other states. The rates were not consistent with the obligation under Section 1915A 30A of the Social Security Act. And CASP is not opposed to ABA rate reductions in the state of Nebraska. We are, however, very concerned that the reduction in rates is actually an overcorrection that will impact access to care, further exacerbate provider shortage across the state, and impact far more than just Medicaid beneficiaries. Our request has been consistent since the reductions were announced. We've asked the state to better understand the cost of doing business here in Nebraska, including that data along with rates from other comparable states when establishing these new reduced rates. I understand the unique complexities associated with taking this approach, and I appreciate the unique challenge rate setting, particularly a significant decrease placed on DHHS. Since August 1st, I've learned of providers leaving organizations because of significant wage reductions up to 30%. Turnover impacts all clients, not just clients with Medicaid. I know of at least 2 ABA organizations that are in the process of discharging all of their clients and exiting the state as a whole, not just the Medicaid network. There were no network access and adequacy issues prior to these rate reductions, with the highest concentration of ABA providers and behavior analysts along the eastern border. In fact, there's only 9 counties with enough LBAs to meet the Medicaid demand and no counties in the state to meet the demand of the combined need for ABA service across all funding types. With only 357 licensed behavior analysts physically residing in Nebraska and Medicaid requiring a minimum of 438 LBAs to meet the needs for their beneficiaries alone, and the state needing 1,624 LBAs to meet that combined need for service. Last week, CASP, in collaboration with the Nebraska Association. Can I keep going? Thank you. Last week, CASP, in collaboration with the Nebraska Association for Behavior Analysis, launched a survey to evaluate the impact of these rate reductions after the first 30 days. These are preliminary results. They are not final because we have not had enough time to collect the data. But thus far, 135 children and families have experienced an interruption to service since August 1st. With 90% of those impacted having Medicaid. 70% of our respondents indicated they were not sure if they would be able to remain part of the Medicaid network long-term. Overwhelmingly, respondents indicated that adjustments to 97153, which is the one-on-one technician treatment code, and 97155, which is the protocol modification and direction code that has been commonly referred today as the supervision code, would allow them to remain part of the network. I actually would like to draw your attention to the front page of the packet that I gave you very quickly. If you'll look at the national average for 97155 for the BCBA, you will note that the proposed rates are substantially below the national average. Our limited data set demonstrates that Medicaid beneficiaries may no longer have access to services that are comparable to those generally available. But there is still an opportunity to intervene before wait lists grow and children lose access to ABA. I offer CASP and myself as a resource to both DHHS and the Nebraska Legislature to help identify other cost containment measures and ways to ensure access to ethically delivered high-quality ABA. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Senator Frederickson.
Thank you, Chair Hardin. Thank you for being here and for providing testimony.
Thank you.
Just to be clear, so I'm looking at the handouts you provided. So data on this, like, so it says 2025 Nebraska, that is the new rates after the rate reduction.
That is correct.
Correct to understand? Okay, I want to make sure I was understanding that correctly. Couple things stood out to me from your testimony. You said that you've done a survey, and you said, I just want to make sure I heard that right. It took 135 cases of interrupted care. That was here in Nebraska?
Yes, exclusive to Nebraska.
Okay.
And we have limited our data set to Nebraska providers only, and more specifically, only Nebraska providers that are part of the Medicaid network.
Okay, so is it correct to say that 135 Nebraska families have been negatively affected by these rate cuts?
That is correct to say.
Okay, and 90% of those were Medicaid recipients?
That is correct.
Okay. The other question I had for you, so CASP is national, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we've heard a couple things about, I know there's been some issues in Indiana or Wisconsin. Do you have direct knowledge of what happened in
I do.
those states? Can you share a little bit?
Absolutely. Federal HHS OIG actually announced, I believe it was at the end of 2023 or the beginning of 2024, the intent to audit all 50 states and their applied behavior analysis Medicaid benefit. They were conducting that audit to ensure that there was no fraud, waste, and abuse occurring, and to ensure that both the state Medicaid agency, the managed care organizations implementing the benefit in MCO states, were providing sufficient oversight and guidance, including sufficient auditing to ensure that the services rendered and paid for were consistent with generally accepted standards of care, the policy within the state, and the CPT billing codes that have been established by the American Medical Association. So to date, there are 2 reports that have been published. The Indiana report was published first. That was at either the very end of 2024 or the very beginning of 2025. And then the Wisconsin report was published in July. We are also anticipating a report from Colorado to be published any day now.
And I'm sorry, the findings of those reports were?
The findings of the reports indicated that there were impermissible payments that had been made in both states. You've heard the total amount of those impermissible payments earlier today. I believe it was 50-something million, and then I believe 18.5 million. The findings identified, I'm going to say, 3 key areas of concern. One of those key areas of concern is insufficient or inappropriate documentation of care. So behavior analysts and the registered behavior technicians working under those licensed providers are required to document their services through session notes or SOAP notes. And what is documented is then kept as part of the medical record and submitted when a prepayment or post-payment audit is conducted by the payer. And those notes need to basically demonstrate that what you billed is what actually occurred. So they indicated that documentation in many cases was insufficient, so there was not enough information to support what was billed, or sometimes documentation included non-billable services. The second major area of concern that was identified and that is consistent across both the Indiana and the Wisconsin reports is that there was concern about were qualified providers rendering care and service. So in the state of Indiana, prior to the OIG coming, technicians, RBTs, were not enrolled via the state Medicaid agency, and so they were not known. There was no way to track and confirm that these individuals had the qualifications that they needed in order to render the care. There were also some incidents where individuals who did not have a registered behavior technician credential, which is an actual credential that requires specific training, demonstration of competency, and passing an exam, there were some instances where behavior technicians, individuals who did not have that RBT credential, had rendered care to Medicaid beneficiaries. And then I think the third key finding that we see across both the Wisconsin and the Indiana reports is that there were some children who received access to care who were not actually eligible to receive care and services, meaning they did not have a comprehensive diagnostic evaluation on file that allowed them to obtain eligibility, or they did not have appropriate referrals in place for them to be able to receive service.
And is there a reason to believe that we have these same issues here in Nebraska?
That's an excellent question. Regarding documentation, I would say yes, that's probably a nationwide concern. CAS has actually developed session note templates to help ensure that providers are documenting everything that is necessary to demonstrate that services are medically necessary. Those templates have been adopted by some payers and by some state Medicaid agencies, but they have not been widely adopted. Regarding the other two areas of concern, I would say no. Nebraska actually requires RBTs. They require them to be enrolled. They have very clear requirements for supervision and oversight within the revised definitions that were released earlier in the year. I don't believe that those last two concerns should be a significant barrier in the state.
Okay. My last question for you is, you mentioned that CASP is not opposed to rate cuts.
Correct.
And you kind of acknowledged that we were on the higher end of the spectrum. You also said that you're concerned this might be an overcorrection.
Yes.
Are you able to share what's the middle path, right? Like what's the happy medium?
I'm so glad you asked that. I actually also provided that data to you guys. The second sets of graphs, they actually show what the 2024 Nebraska rate was, I believe in yellow, the 2025 rate in yellow, and then the middle ground between those two. And CASP, as a trade association, we do not tend to advocate for a specific rate. We just like to provide education and information. Our emphasis is on network adequacy and access to care.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions? Our largest providers of ABA services in Nebraska, as far as you know, run by clinicians?
That's an excellent question. I don't know that I could speak to that for Nebraska specifically. I do know that there are several multi-state providers here in Nebraska.
Several, okay.
Several. I also know that there are several relatively large clinician-owned that are Nebraska-owned, Nebraska-grown providers here.
Okay. Who's the state's largest ABA provider?
Well, that I don't know. That's
Okay.
an excellent question.
All right. I'll help you out. It's above and beyond therapy. Do you know where they're based?
I believe they are based on the East Coast.
New Jersey. Yeah. It's interesting because you say on page 4 of your packet here, you respectively request that DHHS pause the proposed rate reductions. Ethical question for you. Given all that we've discussed so far today, with the federal government looking down a list, as you've said, all 50 states are going to get to have an OIG dance. And when you are the state that has been the highest, according to your own paperwork, the 24-25 numbers up until August 1st did not get better. They got worse than the 2022 numbers that I've seen from your organization. How ethically can Nebraska continue to pay high rates and pay for mortgages for out-of-state organizations that have greatly expanded their operations through their largesse? Again, the legislature in Nebraska and governors and regulatory agencies have allowed for. I'm saying, given where we are in the room right now, how do responsible adults in the room make decisions that are wise without continuing to pay for bad acting
I love that question.
and not face a clawback?
Yes.
Shh, you got to say that word really quietly. It's like saying Voldemort. You don't want to say that word.
I love that question. Thank you so much for asking. So there are a number of policy considerations that can be put in place that I think will make it much more difficult for folks that, are maybe here not for the right reasons, to be able to operate at kind of that same margin, that same threshold. Our request to DHHS has been consistent, and those comments are the comments that I submitted to them back on July 18th before the rate reduction went into effect. Now the rates have been reduced, so a pause is kind of out of the question. I think what we would like and what we would ask for is for the state to take a little bit of time to understand through either talking with providers or through an actuarial analysis to kind of understand what data was missed in the setting of the reduced rates. Because we don't want good providers who are here for the right reason, who care about the children and families in the state, to not be able to, afford to continue to provide this very, very important medically necessary service. But I would say let's focus on policy changes to address utilization, to put in additional guardrails, perhaps things like accreditation of programs, which has not been discussed today. Through accreditation, you have to demonstrate specific criterion in order to be accredited, which often includes a clear understanding of what can and cannot be billed, appropriate clinical oversight, appropriate clinical and operational policy. Those things help to get rid of people who are trying to take shortcuts and who are just trying to make a buck because, the rates are favorable.
As you said, you've been around for a long time in this context.
Yes, sir.
What were you thinking as you watched us?
As I watched Nebraska,
Yeah, and let's even go back to say 2017, 18, 19, then along comes the COVID years and so on and so forth. What were you thinking? I mean, what should we have done? It's a somewhat irrelevant question, but a lot of the time history repeats itself. Have you noticed that?
yes, sir.
History repeats itself. Have I said that before? What could we have done differently?
It's a really, really wonderful question. When I compiled this data last summer, I was shocked when I saw the Nebraska rates, and I immediately knew that they weren't going to stay there. I knew a rate reduction was going to happen because they were so much exponentially higher. It took me aback when I saw them. When rates are established in other states, there's a clear process by which they are evaluated and established. I actually had the privilege of sitting in a call with the state of Colorado yesterday that is looking at their rates. And they have a very, very in-depth process by which they do a comparative analysis. It does include looking at other state rates, but they also adjust their rates for things like cost of living, things like wage considerations, things like, some states have varied rates for in-home versus center. Some states provide a rate bonus if you're willing to effectively serve more rural areas. I think if Nebraska had looked at this holistically, with all things being considered, I don't know that the rates would have been set where they were set to begin with.
There's a strange phenomenon that exists in all of this, and I just want to bounce it off of you. Yes, we've been the highest in these categories. Yep, we've established that. Yet other states were consistently paying lower than we were. Do they have the dearth of challenges that are claimed by Nebraska?
Yes.
If they're down here and we're paying up here, right? And I'm just saying, I'll be really candid. I had one of these organizations state to me, we have to charge those rates in Nebraska because it's such a, quote, abhorrent place to send RBTs and BCBAs to do work. That went over really well with me, as you might imagine. The answer is no, it's not. Thank you for showing your cards. You may go now. But that's the phenomenon, is that, yes, I get it. It's tough everywhere. But it's not so tough that, in fact, we are abhorrent compared to other situations. There's lots of states, every state out there. I don't care if it's New York. My sister lives in an area of California that is remote, and they struggle with these kinds of things even there. And so we've made some decisions, and I really appreciate your feedback, because clearly we want to get it right, and we want to get it right in a sustainable way. It's always great to get really good things, but you want to get good value. I'm not sure that we've gotten the value thing right here in Nebraska. So, other questions? Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
You bet. Dr. Addie Angela, all the way from Indiana.
Yes. Yeah.
My wife is from there.
She sounds lovely.
She is, just because she's from there. That's right. Thanks for making the journey.
Yeah. I think you guys are all getting a paper version of mine.
Okay.
So. Dear Chairman Hardin and distinguished committee members, my name is Dr. Addie Angela, ADDIE-ANGELOV. I am the CEO and co-founder of the Paramount Health Data Project, an Indiana-based nonprofit that researches the correlations between academic and health outcomes. My PhD is in special education, and I have spent the last 30 years serving students with exceptionalities as a special education teacher, a tenured professor, an author, a CEO, a school-based trainer, and a family member. I thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share some of the things that we have learned in Indiana related to standalone ABA therapies. In 2024, the U.S. Department, it was December, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General released a blistering report of Indiana's growing ABA clinic landscape. The report tells a cautionary tale of a field with no billing caps, no quality control, no oversight, no parent voice, and an audacious set of fiscal improprieties. According to the report, Indiana made at least $56 million in improper fee-for-service Medicaid payments for ABA therapies from 2017 to 2020. The report cited Indiana's ABA clinics ballooning their Medicaid billing from $14.4 million to $101.8 million in just 3 years, the second highest in the country. The report documented examples such as an individual student receiving almost $700,000 in individual services, that was page 28, in a 3-year period. Another example documented an individual student receiving almost $28,000 in services per month over multiple years, that was page 10. All while not performing background checks on service providers and showing any impact on student growth. Due to this report, Governor Braun released an executive order on ABA therapies. An Indiana ABA Therapy Commission was established to tackle this issue. As your committee considers the state of this issue in Nebraska, I encourage you to consider 3 points. All entities in Nebraska serving students identified as with an autism spectrum disorder label are held to national standards of best practice, evaluation, and auditing processes, or fidelity measures except standalone ABA therapy providers. Pediatricians are held to ethical standards and by Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services. Insurance companies are held accountable by their regulatory standards in the Nebraska Revised Statute, Chapter 44. Schools are held accountable by IDEA and NRS Chapter 79. And universities are held to accreditation standards and NRS Chapter 50 or 85. Currently, standalone ABA therapy providers are the only entity that does not have a checks and balances in place. Nebraskan families deserve trustworthy and high quality information from which to make decisions about services for their children. It is important to not confuse quantity of service providers with high quality service provision. Young children that are nonverbal are some of the most vulnerable citizens in your state. Vetting these organizations that serve them should be a top priority for a variety of reasons, including but not limited to their physical safety and fidelity of implementation of the services provided. Are you okay? Can I
Please
keep going?
keep going.
Okay, thank you. These children are at a critical developmental milestone, and early intervention is our best chance at supporting their long-term outcomes. If a child receives ABA therapy that is not implemented with fidelity per evidence-based best practices, those milestones can be missed. Families deserve reliable information about the service providers that in private settings. Nebraska could avoid one of the most heartbreaking outcomes of Indiana's Medicaid woes caused by the ABA therapy shortage or overages. Due to the overwhelming billing for ABA therapy, thousands of Hoosier families and children have lost benefits. Children with other disabilities like Down syndrome, chronic disease, complex medical issues, hearing and vision impairment, Angelman syndrome, childhood cancer, and countless others have lost Medicaid benefits. Most recently, Indiana had to announce an up to 35% rate decrease for basic child care provisions, affecting over 55,000 child care providers in our state. Your commitment to ensuring the fiscal stability of your Medicaid-supported programs by implementing ABA guidelines would be extremely helpful to ensure that you don't have to make the same decisions that we are having to make right now. I appreciate your invitation to testify today and I hope that this is helpful in the decisions that you have to make moving forward.
Thank you. Questions? Senator Frederickson.
Thank you, Hardin. Thank you for being here and for your willingness, one, to share your experience in Indiana, but also to, I really appreciate you offering tangible and concrete suggestions. That's always helpful from a policy perspective.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding these correctly. And I don't know if I'm assuming you were listening to the previous testifier who sort of talked about one policy option we have here in the state is to provide or to create some type of accreditation for ABA providers or ABA clinics, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Does that seem to be kind of what you're suggesting here as well in terms of the guardrails for the standalone providers? Am I understanding those to be similar?
I would hope that you would make that one of many things. Like,
Yeah.
I think the legislation that you guys have that requires folks to get a license, I think that was a great step in the right direction. That's very positive momentum that you should continue down.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking about, how do we do accreditation? I also think, I've heard a lot of people testify this morning about what they believe is happening.
Mm-hmm.
So really getting some hard data around what that is
Mm-hmm.
and what those things look like,
Mm-hmm.
I think would be extremely helpful too.
Yeah, and that latter part has been an interest of mine as well, because I've heard a lot in kind of being able to see the data and what we're seeing, and I understand there's some auditing that has been going on with our state auditor as well, and I eagerly await those results too. But this has been helpful. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? Senator Meyer.
Thank you, Chairman Hardin. With the substantial increase in Indiana on these types of services, was that indicative across other services or other departments in Indiana? Was there a substantial increase in
Not like that.
expenditures, or was this specifically with HHS?
It was when we reviewed what was happening, I believe Governor Braun's executive order cited a $685 million difference.
So this was part of a larger problem?
No, that was just for ABA therapy.
That was just for ABA.
Yeah, it ballooned very quickly to the point where it impacted the other services that Medicaid was supposed to be paying for, which is why we're seeing us make such difficult decisions right now.
So in the domino world, one falls, then the next falls. Medicaid billing went from 14.4 million to 101 ish million in just 3 years. So you got to pay for those services multiple times because you overpaid for them. It expanded, and then you experienced a clawback and you got to pay for them again as a state. Am I following that correctly? Because there was a clawback of some money. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're in the that very painful process right now.
So that means the state of Indiana got to pay for that multiple times.
Possibly, yes. I mean, I'm not in charge of our budget, so I don't see the exact numbers, but I think the other issue when you say pay for it several times is we don't have a lot of great evidence about what the ROI for those dollars were when it comes to educational outcomes for children who are attending those services. So we don't know how many of them met their goals. We don't know how many of them grew. We hear anecdotal stories one way or the other, but as far as kids actually growing and meeting those milestones, there's no hard data to tell us what was happening.
Tell us about Paramount Health data.
Yeah.
What's your mission?
So we correlate the academic impact of health outcomes on children. So we specifically are a non-for-profit. We solely take contracts from different schools around the state, as well as from our state, to look at the academic impact of health services in schools. So really, how do we measure and show the in a quantitative way, the impact of health services on kids' academics?
Curious. You've heard a bit about our story from the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
How did you all get there in Indiana? I mean, how was there a precipitous change in legislation? Was there regulatory change that took place in those years leading up to that growth? I mean, talk to us about how your world looked at the scene of the crime compared to what we experienced in Nebraska. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I know, we've interviewed several folks involved in this, including, the company that had the Medicaid contract for our state at that time, different providers, schools, different families. And I think one of the things that most people talk about is there was a decision in 2022 where we went to straight up billable hours for ABA therapy. And that was a change in how ABA therapy was paid for in standalone clinics. So I think it's different than for schools. Like the work that your son is doing is fantastic. We work with paras all the time. And obviously implementing ABA therapy along with an educational setting is really important. But one of the things that we saw was that schools didn't have the resources to be able to provide it. But then they also struggled to partner with ABA standalone clinics because they didn't adhere to the same national standards. So where a school is required to work under IDEA regulations, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, ABA standalone clinics are not required to do that right now. So the reality is the school couldn't work with the therapies because they couldn't work with them. They don't follow the same standards of rigor. So I think there was where schools can provide access to services, finding good partners for that who also adhere to those same standards is really important for them. Otherwise they can't do that. So I think there are lots of options. I do think we've seen autism. I mean, we've known since the 1940s with, Bettelheim was the researcher that started surveying families here in the United States. His theories were around refrigerator mothers. He said that mothers didn't love their children, which is why they needed therapy to learn how to love their children. Thankfully, we've learned from science. I think we saw a huge surge in the 1980s where we saw large amounts of money coming in around autism specifically and advocacy, and we've gotten much better at that. We in Indiana had a representative, Dan Burton, his grandson had autism, so a ton of money got filtered into our state to better understand research and services. And so I think we've seen this over, at least since the 1940s, a real push to better understand what's happening and how do we do that. And right now the science is still moving forward. So I think we get a little bit better at it all the time. But I don't think we have a silver bullet answer, which is why we have, all of the questions. But I think we know from what we've learned with ABA therapy that making sure that the groups that are offering it outside of a regulatory body, like a school, a university, a pediatrician's office, a psychologist's office, we really have to be thoughtful about what's in place to hold them accountable.
Other questions? Otherwise, I'll keep going. Senator Quick?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So on the, so right now Nebraska, the department's going to do the rate cuts, or they have happened. That can also have an adverse effect for some of the clinics that are really doing good work to help kids. And I think you alluded to already that maybe there's other ways we can do that through policy changes to help regulate the industry. So is there any, do you see that could have an adverse effect, just the drop in rates as much as they've gone?
I think a comprehensive approach to figure out how to address this problem is probably the best approach. So looking at all of the things, like you said, an all hands on deck situation, you clearly have a group here, you're listening to the public, you're taking in policy, you're looking at data, both, I think, student outcome data. I mean, even a family satisfaction survey, like are families happy with what they're getting? Data on whether or not students are growing as part of these things. I think all of those things should be brought in. I think there are a whole lot of questions right now that could be answered by doing some kind of a comprehensive review. So I don't think just one answer is going to fix a problem of this scale and scope. I mean, to your point, it's a national issue. And I think the shortage, the pipeline issue is also a national issue. I mean, we're also a rural state. We see large areas where kids do not have access to services because of the pipeline issue. I mean, I think honestly, the reality is the baby boomers are retiring. We're figuring out in every field, how do we fulfill this need? And this is no different. So, I mean, we have areas where kids are 3 counties away from a board certified anything, figuring out how to address that need, but to also ensure that all other kids with disabilities who qualify for Medicaid continue to get their services. I mean, taking away desperately needed services for kids with chronic disease or complex medical issues to ensure that another child gets services is a choice I do not wish on anyone.
Did you notice, or were you able to measure during that time with your organization other programs that suffered because of what was ballooning in this particular area, and therefore other things? Because there's not an infinite amount of money.
There's not. We have one bucket to serve as many people as possible in the most responsible way. And that's why these decisions are so difficult. So all of the groups that I outlined, we see organizations closing because they're no longer able to serve their populations because Medicaid in Indiana can no longer support what they do. So the reality is it's affecting everyone.
Forgive me for not knowing. What's the population of Indiana? Don't tell my wife.
That's not what I do.
Oh, okay, sorry. I know you're bigger than we are by population. So
I feel like we're taller and you're longer. Is that how we do that?
we're 2 million. What do you have, John? 6.9 million people.
Yeah.
So I was just curious about that. Will you comment on us? Will you, August 1st, rates changed.
Mm-hmm.
What did we get right? What did we not do as well as we could have in terms of our reaction to all of this? What are your thoughts?
At this point, we haven't done a study of Nebraska, so it'd be really hard for me to say that. I think you all are moving in the right direction with the commission that you have, with listening to your community, talking to folks, and really putting all the options on the table and making an informed decision. It feels like you're doing this earlier, so I feel like you've given yourselves the gift of time. We had an administration change, and it wasn't until our new administration came in that we addressed this issue. The previous administration had allowed it to balloon. So I think nothing about this is fun. There is nothing about this issue. Everyone wants a silver bullet answer, and one just simply doesn't exist. I think you have to choose what's best based on what you have in front of you and hope that you've done the right thing, and constantly go back and look to see how it's affecting all of your students and all of your kids, and not just one piece of that population.
Background checks in Indiana?
We've just implemented those.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that's new for you, okay? And what are the qualification or the certification requirements to be involved in ABA in Indiana? Do you know? I mean, to be an RBT?
I wish we had some,
You don't have any, okay,
not right now.
all
We're
right,
hoping that that's a recommendation that comes out of the commission.
okay. Moving forward, have you set forth any new requirements in terms of accountability for the providers and whatnot?
That is what our commission is discussing now, so we're all waiting to hear what their report and what their findings are when they finish.
Okay. Other questions? What did we miss? What did we miss?
I'm hoping that several states can start working together, that all of the states that have faced this, like call your colleagues in Indiana, ask them how they're making decisions, ask them what data they have. I think in a lot of ways there's safety in numbers, and I think the Midwest could lead in this area. Like if we all come together, we share, this is what we learned in Indiana, this is what we learned in Nebraska, this is what we learned in Wisconsin, this is what we're learning in Colorado. That only makes us better understand and learn from each other. It also makes us more efficient, and it allows us to reduce any redundancies. So there's no reason to reinvent the wheel if one state has figured out a piece of it. So I do think that working together would be extremely helpful, because this is definitely a national issue.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Lastly, Drew Goncharowski. Welcome, Mr. Director.
Thank you, sir. Just making sure the phone is silenced. Good morning, Chairman Hardin, and members of the Health and Human Services Committee. My name is Drew Goncharowski, DREWGONSHOROWSKI, and I am the Director of the Division of Medicaid and Long-Term Care in the Department of Health and Human Services. I'm here to provide additional comments related to LR 191 and on Medicaid's coverage of applied behavior analysis more broadly. Nebraska Medicaid recognizes how crucial ABA services are to families across the state. This is why our recent rate adjustments have been necessary. An increase from 4.6 to 85.6 million in annual ABA spending over a 5-year period is simply not sustainable. In order to ensure that these services continue to be available to families who need them, it would be irresponsible for Nebraska to be such a statistical outlier in ABA payment rates. To continue in this way would create new challenges for an already limited state budget and would put our program at high risk for adverse audit findings. Our program's recent actions, such as our revised service definitions and submittal of a state plan amendment with the federal government, will ensure that quality services are available in the years to come. I'd also like to take a little time just to sort of react and provide some additional comment across what was a really just great wide-ranging set of other testifiers today. One item in particular, I think that there's been some discussion around the OIG audits, so the Office of Inspector General audits. It's very clear that ABA as a national focus is a very serious issue. I've heard some of my counterparts across the country call this effectively a generational issue for Medicaid programs everywhere. To give some specific context in terms of what this nearly 2,000% increase actually means in terms of mental health services in the state of Nebraska, ABA services effectively in terms of spend doubled every year since 2020. That doubling is more than the full percentage increase over that 5-year period of all other mental health services. So mental health services, pulling ABA from that, spending grew 78% over the time period 2020 to now. So it's just in context of the previous testifier as well, correct? Like there is this just sort of unprecedented growth in spending here in the state as well. Since 2023, the per member spend on a member that was receiving ABA services grew from 36,000 per member that was receiving the services. As of last year, it will be close to 56,000. I know that there were some questions around sort of, is this driven by utilization? Is it driven by increased hours? In that context as well, the units per member increased by roughly 50 to 50%, 55, right around 55%. So in terms of hours, we don't have a specific number on that, but the average per unit was definitely increasing more as more members came in. In terms of Medicaid and the number of members served currently, it's right around 1,500 members. I think last year it was closer to 1,600, and so far, in terms of unique members, we're just slightly under 1,500 members receiving ABA services. I think thank you for your time. Be happy to answer any other questions related to this, and I'm sure I can speak to anything that you'd like to ask. So,
Questions? Senator Frederickson.
Thank you, Chair Hardin. Thank you, Director, for being here and for providing your testimony. And I think a lot of us are sort of digesting everything we heard today. It seems like there's a lot to consider and to look at. And a lot of what I interpreted was, obviously the rates are one component of sort of what we've been seeing in the state. And I think that, I'll commend the department on being proactive on what they're seeing kind of nationally and wanting to get ahead of that here in Nebraska. But I also heard a lot about, other guardrails that we could be looking at as a state for ABA services, just to ensure that the services being provided are, one, that there's network adequacy, but two, that they're, clinically indicated and accurate, et cetera, et cetera. The licensure we passed in 2023 seems to be in the right direction with that. I think program accreditation is something I'm kind of curious to learn more about as well. One thing we did hear today is that there seems to be this, and I don't want to speak for for everyone, but there seems to be this universal agreement that the rates were high and that a reduction was certainly coming and should have been coming. We also heard from some testifiers that they feel that may have been a bit of an overcorrection, and I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on, as the Medicaid director, as to whether or not there's wiggle room there, or if you have an immediate response to that reaction.
So I think Mr. Ahern spoke to this as well, but I'll reiterate that rate adjustments are part of a sort of holistic process that we've been taking to address issues around ABA in the state. It's sort of a down a memory lane for me too. So I started as Medicaid director in Nebraska in December, and right before then, that was sort of in the comment period for the first set of Medicaid service definitions, talking about maximums in terms of hours without medical necessity, parent and caregiver involvement requirements, supervision requirements, and I think a couple other sort of around telehealth that had other issues. But one of my first provider meetings actually was on ABA. So as a director, I believe it was right at the end of December, maybe right before the Christmas holiday. It was above and beyond therapy, and CASP was also there virtually. So we've been sort of in this situation of having conversations with providers and working through. And in terms of, I'll get to the question on rate adjustments. This has all been part of this holistic process with what we believe is a careful approach on looking at our sister states. In terms of the ABA service provision, the majority of that service is provided under the 97153 code, the code that I think previous testifiers mentioned. And even with our adjustment, given what you received from CASP, I believe we're still in the top 15 in the country for that rate. And I would also flag for you, I don't know what that version looks like in terms of the more national conversation on this. I don't know if North Carolina is above or below us on that, but I believe it was last week or the prior week, North Carolina announced, due to budget pressures in their Medicaid programs, a system-wide 3% reduction to their rates. I believe it was 3%, but specifically a 10% reduction to their ABA rates. And that would put their 97153 below us. I know that I think Colorado was also above us there, and given their hearing imminent OIG report, I'd imagine that they will be sort of reckoning in a similar way that Indiana and Wisconsin have.
Other questions? You're a researcher, is that right?
If you want to call an economist a researcher, then sure.
Is there a history in America of, at different times, have we, as a people, found some part of society and there was money moving in a direction and we go stand in the way of that flow of money? Are there other diagnostic codes and things in Medicaid, Medicare, so on and so forth, where it looked like an opportunity and the conditions just looked like a wonderful chance for organizations or individuals to, from an entrepreneurial standpoint, stand in the way of the money, get in front of it? Because that's what this feels like to me.
So not ABA, but I can speak of another example that I think is current in the news, which is skin substitutes in Medicare plans.
Okay.
So not Medicaid, but just sort of for certain populations in wound care, there's been reporting around effectively providing a very expensive skin substitute more than probably is medically necessary. So there's a lot of wide reporting on this sort of phenomenon, which kind of highlights a high cost procedure, and then you also have a sort of lacking guardrail in place to catch such an activity, and that is a fertile ground for misuse.
It's been reported to me that our unmatched ABA rates in certain categories have attracted out-of-state providers. What's the downside of that?
I think that attracting providers to provide quality care and service and appropriate care for our members, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. When the incentives exist such that providers are effectively receiving a signal to come to a state without the core purpose of the provision of care, which is improving the lives of our members. If that incentive does not exist, that they are operating in a way to make profits, if they're putting profits over people, that is unacceptable.
Have any providers indicated to you that they're closing the doors since August 1st?
Not particularly to my knowledge.
Have any-
I've heard this discussion.
Okay.
So
Have any indicated the opposite, that they're expanding?
I believe that there was some report of, I think it was over the past week, once again, an out-of-state provider, perhaps having interest in setting up more clinics in Nebraska in light of the rate adjustments.
Okay. Other questions? Senator Quick?
Thank you, Sheriff. So I know you talked about that you talked with providers beforehand, but did they have input into like the rate adjustments that were going to happen? Or did they have knowledge to them before they were announced, like July 1st? I think they were announced on July 1st.
I believe we provided the 30-day comment period for providers on that.
Okay. I just wonder if they were part of the discussions that this would be the rate adjustment, if they could have some input, or I don't know, DHHS went out and visited any clinics. I had the opportunity to go to a clinic over in Hastings, Nebraska, and I saw the type of care they provided. And they expressed their concerns over how it was going to affect their clinic. So it's just a suggestion, or
Yeah.
if you have an answer to
No,
that, if
understood.
DHHS ever
Yeah.
goes to clinics.
Yeah, I mean, I've visited clinics, and I believe we have clinics to schedule. At least we have another one scheduled or working on scheduling after this hearing as well. In terms of the discussion and open discussion with Nebraska Medicaid, I will always say that it is an open door policy with me. So these discussions are always welcome. It's also the case where if you email me, it might take me a minute to get back to you, but I will get back to you. And that was always the case. I will always look at the email. I will read them. I will read them in entirety, and we'll make sure that we have a conversation.
I have one more question. Do you think in the future, if we see that these rates are adversely affecting care, or we have children aren't receiving services, that we could look at a rate adjustment that would increase to a level that would provide the type of care that we need to do?
So I'll reiterate what Matt already said here too, is that Nebraska Medicaid is specifically requesting of our MCOs that we will be tracking access on ABA services closely. So there will be a regular report. I don't know what the frequency will be on that, but we are going to actively be watching what access looks like on ABA services within the state and across the state, and make sure that we're bringing in our guardrails appropriately, but then also understanding the effects of the changes that we're making.
Thank you.
What'd we miss?
So I think I might go back to some of the national discussion here, just in terms of OIG report. Just sort of, I'm not necessarily pushing back on any of the other testifiers, but one item on the OIG report that you should be aware of is that generally these are sort of retrospective. I believe Indiana's report was in the 2018 to 22 range. Wisconsin's report was similarly in that range. The question that was asked sort of other testifiers was, would you expect that these issues exist in the state? And I know there were differing answers, but my expectation for that time period would be that any state in this country would have those issues, especially in that time period. I think that there is sort of an urgency to what we're doing specifically because we know that this is a meaningful issue across the state. One item of particular note in those OIG findings is how these things work. They tend to sample sort of 100 member months. That's the sample. What's buried, and it's not necessarily all that buried in those reports, is that for both of the ones that have been released so far, they have indicated that every single sample has some flavor of improper payment, improper documentation, possibilities of services not rendered, possibilities of more hours billed than are even humanly possible in a day. And to speak to Senator Frederickson's question around the sort of audit that is occurring here in the state of Nebraska with the state auditor, I'm also looking forward to seeing all of the items that they bring before us too. And that's been really, really excited to be able to work through that with them as well, because ultimately it is a question of ensuring that we provide the appropriate level of care for our members and make sure that they're receiving what they need here.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, this will conclude LR 191. Thank you all for your attendance. You're wanting to close.
That's what I do.